In the dark, stifling space, the light seemed swallowed, only heavy gasps echoed, and smiles twisted into grimaces. The battlefield soaked in red, bloodlight kept raining down with no escape. One by one people fell, yet faint rays of hope threaded through. After all, we've finally come this far. Even facing a rageful onslaught, still keeping his will. If we can defeat it, we will. Everything happened too fast. That light pierced straight through Gray Lee's chest. The pain hit so suddenly, he froze for a moment. His chest was pierced, his eyes empty. Gray Lee's dream had to close. His body lost weightlessness. His knees buckled to the ground. No strength left, his whole body collapsed. Only regret remained, so that's how it is. Blood flowed on the ground, bodies of the fallen littered around. He slowly accepted it. This was a mortal blow. Looking at the wreckage and the comrades who'd fallen, Gray felt ashamed. In the end, will I die without being able to do anything? His eyes burned with hatred toward the creature hovering in midair. One day an unnamed calamity appeared and wiped out continents, the enemy of humanity, the Purger. It kept destroying. Gray watched those who stood with shields take hits bravely, entrusting his hopes to them. The group formed to protect humanity included a young man who survived the impact of a giant meteor. The world's shield, Brian Miller. The green-haired girl summoned multiple magic circles at once. A grand sage said to wield power equivalent to an army, the great sage Bella Albert. The boy in green armor wielding bow and arrow. His shots were razor-sharp and precise. An archer who once felled a high-level drake with a single arrow. The divine archer Jacob Bloomfield. The golden-eyed girl who never flinched from danger, using her speed to overcome every obstacle, the strongest female swordsman in history, Sword Saint Amy White. Seeing them made Gray even more insecure, while we were, well, the so-called support unit. He'd known it all along, a feeling of being used and then abandoned. The truth was harsher. In reality, we were merely sacrificial pawns. Gray watched their skillful, powerful combat and felt admiration. These people truly operated on another level. I know graduates from the World Union Academy are very talented. Seeing those warriors close in easily, he gradually realized the gap between him and them, never expecting the divide to be so vast. The Purger was suppressed by spheres of magic. Gray trembled on the ground. On Amy's side, the assault continued relentlessly. Her sword strikes were full of force. Gray's pent-up grievances finally reached a peak. The humiliation became unbearable. We too trained very hard, but Amy used her speed to force the Purger onto the defensive repeatedly. A powerful blow finally wounded it, but it wasn't afraid, it was delighted. Oh ho, you hurt me. Now its body radiated a strong crimson spiritual power. The sensation was completely different from before. It was growing stronger. Good, it's time. The Purger was forming a spiral. In an instant, it turned into long blades, streaking straight forward. All the rest were killed in a single move, bodies severed. The scene was brutal, and the only one left alive was a vile fellow. Gray's pupils contracted. He was stunned. Everyone was dead, the Purger calm, so it was serious after all. Gray couldn't believe it. It wiped them out in one slash, and yet it said it was just playing earlier. Then he slowly closed his eyes. No. Thinking of the chaos, Gray accepted the harsh truth. There was no way to win. His body lay motionless on the ground. Suddenly Gray Lee snapped awake, eyes wide. Wait, how long has it been since my heart was pierced? Seeing his reflection in the blood pool, he wondered how on earth he was still alive. The drip of blood, a voice rang out, "Found you." Gray felt himself pulled into another space. Before him was a magical light. It gradually opened into a black hole, beckoning Gray. Come, wielder of great power. He froze, the feeling hazy and unreal. A world unfolded like a great city inside. Gray could stand, his wounds healed. Where am I? Is this an afterlife? But the place felt a bit desolate. He sensed someone watching. He turned around, and there was more. Behind him stood a figure in a black cloak, mysterious. Who are you? The figure was Kronos. His face was hidden, yet he radiated authority. Kronos began to explain. You are not dead yet. Your wounds have all been healed. The ancient magical space was bathed in blinding gold light. Gray Lee was aghast. On the screen was the body that had been wounded. He asked softly, "Did you heal me?" Kronos replied calmly, "No, not me, but your own power." Gray remained skeptical. He touched his chest. "My own power." Kronos was also helpless to explain. "I cannot explain it. Even I cannot precisely analyze your power." Kronos, confident and solemn, assessed seriously, but assured him his power could even surpass the Purger if he learned to control it. Gray still doubted. "You mean I could win this battle?" Kronos was cold but resolute. I don't know, I won't pin many hopes, but I believe we should eliminate that purger, precisely for that reason. Before he finished, Kronos thrust straight through his chest like before. Then he quietly instructed, "There, you can go now." Gray's chest was guarded by a magic circle, and he gradually returned to his own timeline. Kronos' voice echoed, "I will lend you my power." Everything happened as if in a dream. Gray returned to his body, still lying on the ground. He planted his sword into the ground, forcing himself to rise. The blade started to change, the tip shifting color. This is. From an ordinary weapon, it had become a black sword. Kronos' voice lingered. "Now it is your power. My power is not something mortal eyes can see." Gray Light was ready for battle. The noise alerted the purger. The moment it turned, Gray closed in and struck. His slash packed serious power. Now Gray was filled with murderous intent. He was resolute. The purger sensed that tremendous magical force, impossible, who knew someone this strong existed. He stepped back cautiously to assess. It seemed he had inflicted damage. Like a lightning bolt, his body surged with spirit power, and Gray moved forward without hesitation. He kept his focus to detect the enemy's weak point. "My power is greater than yours." Before Gray could finish, it counterattacked swiftly. "Do not underestimate me." He froze in an instant. His body was cut in two. Gray realized it too late. He was utterly horrified. Seeing the mutilated body and blood spraying everywhere, the purger looked arrogant and smug, worthy of praise indeed. Then it turned its back, unguarded. "You forced me to use my true strength." Suddenly from behind, a pair of eyes glowed red as if to burn everything. The purger's body seemed crushed by an unseen force. A body wrapped in dark magic stood towering before it. In its hand was a black sword. It was Gray, hovering in midair, not dead. The black smoke wasn't just on the blade. It had merged with his body. The purger began to panic. "What the hell?" It quickly raised its shield. Are you really human?" Half of Gray Lay's face had become distorted. The black sword now grew enormous and swung straight at the purger. But the force was too great. In a flash, the shield shattered, and the slash cleaved the purger in two. The blow also carved a massive gouge into the ground. The purger kept asking its stupid question, "Are you really human?" Gray's voice brimmed with fury as he faced a killer. "That should be my question." A savage laugh erupted. Gray planted his feet and stepped back. Despite a very deep wound, the purger remained alive. It rasped, "You're still alive. Truly, your power is not to be underestimated." It exhaled in heavy gasps. Then it pressed its face to Gray's and threatened, "Oh, I'll crush you again and again until you die." Not wanting to argue with a lunatic, Gray quickly gathered all his strength and delivered a straight, full-force slash at it. The slash was powerful, leaving the enemy severely injured. Yellow fluids flowed from his body, and he screamed in pain before cursing, "You monster!" But the purger suddenly stopped. He clasped his hands together as if practicing magic. His body began to emit strange beams of light. He was focusing to communicate with a great power from within him, and his wings also changed to a myriad of colors. Both his palms faced each other, preparing to cast a spell, and between his palms was a magic circle. The flow of time was suddenly altered, and night fell, covering everything. The purger muttered, "Time's up." Looking at the moon gradually appearing, Gray was suspicious. "What is this? Suddenly it's night." He gave a sharp smile, unbothered. Before he knew it, Gray had appeared behind the purger, his voice whispering, "So what?" Then he launched an attack straight at his neck. But now his skin had a layer of very hard, firm protection. Gray faltered for a second. The purger spoke with arrogant disdain. "It's useless. In this dream realm, nothing can harm me. Stop resisting in vain and take one last look at the star." Gray was intimidated. He stood stunned, not daring to move. From deep within those eyes, one could clearly see the light from the sky racing toward him. It rushed forward at high speed, growing larger. It was as large and bright as the stars in the sky. The purger's voice crept into his mind. "It's beautiful, right?" Now the star was very close, looking like a giant fireball. Then it crashed straight where Gray was standing, creating a terrifying explosion that destroyed everything around. The purger flew up, looking down at the rubble. After a while, the site of the explosion turned into a deep crater, but Gray was nowhere to be seen. He was triumphant. "You won't be able to resurrect if you've turned to dust." But from above, a magic portal began to appear. The purger was confused. What? As it formed more clearly, it looked like a clock storing time. He realized vaguely, "This is." Kronos' voice drifted in. "You really gathered an incredible amount of power. This should be enough to send you back." Hearing that familiar voice, the purger panicked. "Impossible, Kronos." Without acknowledging him, Kronos calmly continued his actions. "Can you hear me? You holder of great power, use all my power. I will send you back to the past." The purger's agitation reached its peak. He shouted, "Kronos, you bastard." Ignoring him, Kronos continued his work. "This is all I can do for you." The clock of time began to run, spinning back into the past. As time returned to the beginning, his voice grew faint. I entrust the fate of this world to you. Perhaps this wasn't the end, but Gray's new beginning. Gray Lee woke up, lying on a green, grassy field. The sky was clear, and the world was still peaceful. He sat up slowly. Where am I? Looking at the scenery around him brought a feeling of healing, a place full of life. Looking into the distance, he suddenly recognized the mountains, houses, and the village. Was that his hometown, Renato Village? Everything felt so nostalgic, like a dream. It had clearly been destroyed 15 years ago, so why was it still here? Gray vaguely remembered Kronos' final words. He woke up. The things he said earlier, did they really happen? The agitation caused his injured wrist to ache sharply. Looking at his injury, he pondered. This wound. Right, during this time, I was often bullied by Belder and the others. His body began to tremble, and he told himself, I can't let myself be beaten up by them like that anymore. In the past, Gray saw himself as too weak to fight back, but they're so strong, I can't beat them. So he wanted to continue that fate. Not daring to think of anything too far-fetched, destroying the Purger was just a pipe dream. Gray stood up and headed toward the forest, reassuring himself that once he got a bit stronger, he'd think about dealing with them, as he didn't want to get hurt. He suddenly stopped halfway. It was Belder's group. They were intentionally blocking his path, every one of them looking smug talk about perfect timing. Belder spoke in a condescending tone. I've been looking for you this whole time. You're a real pain in the neck. Gray was exhausted and didn't want to argue, but they tossed a sword at him and commanded, pick it up. Having no intention of obeying, he remained silent. Seeing this, the others pushed further. Stop playing dumb. Let's have ourselves a little match. Gray Lee tried to avoid it out of concern for his physical condition. Oh, a match. Sorry, but my wounds haven't healed yet. Thanks for the invite, but I'm afraid I can't participate until I'm recovered. Belder and his group had no intention of letting him go, their contempt for him plain on their faces, as Belder offered mock reassurance. Don't worry, the blade is incredibly dull, so it'll be perfectly safe. Sensing their malicious intent, Gray Lee exposed it bluntly. No matter how dull the blade is, it's still a massive hunk of iron. If it hits someone in a vital spot then. Before he could finish, Belder cut him off. He didn't want to lecture and certainly didn't have the patience for it. Shut up, he barked, slamming his sword into the ground in a fit of rage. Belder began to threaten him. You think you have the right to refuse, if you don't like the sword. Then he lunged forward competitively, full of confidence. Then you can just fight barehanded. Gray was utterly shocked. The guy wanted to fight him while he was unarmed. What kind of test match was this? He then tried to piece together his past. Before his regression, a former military doctor had told him that the reason his swordsmanship never improved was because of an injury he sustained as a child. Thinking back, perhaps the life of a loser like him started right here. Not wanting to feel regret again, and refusing to live a useless life like his previous one, he unconsciously dodged Belder's strike. Gray Lee was also surprised by what he had just done. He found it hard to understand Belder's attack. While he was still dazed, the boy launched another strike, but he dodged it too. Was it always this slow? Belder tried his best to take Gray down, but he dodged everything. It was as if Gray finally understood the key. No, that wasn't it. Belder was frustrated because he couldn't land a hit. You bastard, why can't I hit you? Even as the sword was about to graze his face, Gray remained focused only on watching the move. He then gently avoided the blow, skillfully slipping past every single sword stroke. He understood his body better now. He had become faster. The people with Belder were all stunned. The mushroom-haired guy found it hard to believe. The way he moved, it was as if he had become a completely different person. Gray quickly picked up the sword from the ground, thinking that while he might not have the body he once had, this time he gripped the sword tightly, determined to resist, because he still had the memories of the battles he had fought. Belder attacked from above, intending to deliver a finishing blow. Take this. Not at all what he expected, Gray countered, and the force was so strong it sent him stumbling backward. This time Gray was still worried, but he was more concerned for his opponent. Did he really fall from just that? Would it even be okay to fight a total amateur like? After concentrating for a moment, he decided not to back down this time. No, he didn't deserve mercy. This trash had tormented him just because he couldn't fight back after all. Now he wanted to change his humiliating past, his eyes filled with determination. However, that was no longer the case now. Gray swung his strike, sending Belder's sword flying elsewhere. The boy panicked. Damn it. He had never encountered this situation in the past. Did he really drop his sword that easily? He's even worse than a total rookie. With no weapon left in hand, Gray began to lecture him. Perhaps you've never been trained on how to block a sword. Then he stomped his foot hard in a threatening manner, making Belder jump. But don't worry, because you guys taught me that. Gray raised his sword high, a smile on his face but his eyes showing clear hostility. As long as the blade is dull, it's fine to hit someone. The sword stroke slashed across Belder's shoulder. Blood poured out, leaving him in a state of panic. Fresh drops of blood splattered on his face, as if to remind him of the pain. Belder collapsed, clutching his shoulder and crying out in agony. Things had spiraled out of Gray's control, because this incident wasn't part of his plan. He hesitated. Wasn't the blade supposed to be dull? Doubting himself, he held the sword up to inspect it again. The blade was indeed chipped, leaving Gray a bit flustered. It was clearly dull, and if it had been a sharp sword, he might have been dead. But that didn't mean he would forgive him. A second later, his gaze turned cold and sharp. Gray slammed the sword directly across Belder's face, the force of the impact drawing blood. With a bloody nose and a couple of broken teeth, the force of the blow sent him flying backward, but Gray didn't soften, thinking only, "I'll just keep this dull sword then." Gray Lee walked closer, completely suppressing Belder as he crawled on the ground and mocked him. "What's wrong? Why are you screaming so much?" Belder was trembling to the point of tears, but Gray continued to criticize him. "You're the one who said a dull sword would be safe." His face was relaxed now. Although he was smiling, his anger was clearly visible. "It was you, wasn't it?" Belder was too terrified to speak. Just when it seemed he might have repented, he suddenly turned and ordered his cronies, "What are you standing there for? Get him." The fat guy hesitated after witnessing the previous fight. He had suddenly become very strong, but the mushroom-haired guy was still aggressive and completely looked down on others. "Let's jump him together. Grab him from behind." They then lunged forward from different directions, surrounding Gray. Without a hint of fear, he remained cold and imposing. "What's this? You want another round?" The whole group rushed in to attack simultaneously, while Gray stood perfectly still. He muttered to himself, "I was going to let this go, but..." Now only the sounds of wailing and groaning in pain could be heard. Every single one of them had a battered, swollen face and was kneeling on the ground. Looking at them reminded Gray of those dark days. Back then, he was terrified of these guys, so he immediately interrogated them. "You guys are from the Saria Swordsmanship Dojo, right?" Belder didn't dare look him in the eye but admitted it anyway, and the fat guy started to confess. "We thought we were strong enough already, so we haven't been going there late." Gray felt helpless at their childish thinking. Strong enough, He shouldn't have expected much from the dojo, but it was still useful nonetheless. Resting the sword on his shoulder, he made a demand of Belder's group. "Introduce me to the dojo. They only take people through referrals, don't they?" Feeling the humiliation, Belder grew uneasy. "Can't you ask someone else? If I tell the master that I lost, I can't even imagine what she'd say." Gray made a threatening slash through the air. "So, should we pick up where we left off then?" Belder's face darkened with fear. As if chased by a ghost, he abandoned his teammates and ran for his life, shouting back, "I'll introduce you, the dojo is this way." The ones who came with him were all shocked. "What? Hey, wait, Belder, don't leave us behind." A long while later, Belder and the others led Gray Lee to a town. As they walked, he grew curious. "But why do you want to go to the dojo?" To which Gray naturally and indifferently replied, "This dojo has recommendation slots for the academy, doesn't it?" Belder had skipped school for many days, so he only knew vaguely. "I did hear something about that," and Gray let him know this was his main interest. "That's why I want to go." The long-haired guy interrupted the conversation. "I think you're strong enough even without the academy." Gray Lee was strict with himself. He wouldn't allow himself to become lazy because of a compliment. "If I were truly enough, how great would that be?" Remembering the battle with the purgers sent him into deep thought. He had heard that even the strongest lineup in the world was no match for the purger. Even when he used that power, he couldn't deal any damage, even though the enemy was fighting seriously. The image of the purger's enhanced power pushed him even harder. He didn't know how much stronger he had to get to defeat that man. However, it wasn't impossible. While he was lost in thought, Belder signaled that they had arrived. The only reason he came to the dojo was to get stronger. At that moment, even though he felt it for just a second, he had been able to control the dark power. He tried to recall the times he practiced with the Sword Saint. What he focused on in that moment was the true swordsmanship that the Sword Saint had taught him. Gray always felt regret. If only he had spent more time practicing swordsmanship under the same conditions as the Sword Saint. The outcome of the battle might have been different. After everything, he finally understood his mission upon returning to the past. That must be why Kronos brought him here. A girl's voice brought him back to reality. "So, in short, what you're trying to tell me is..." Belder's group was kneeling on the floor in repentance while the other person continued to question them. "That must be their master. You used the tactics you learned from me to bully a civilian, and ended up getting your asses kicked." The master was a young woman with platinum hair covering one eye. She was strictly punishing her students. She was Saria, the instructor of the Saria Swordsmanship Dojo. Belder still tried to justify himself, not repenting honestly. We weren't trying to bully him. It was just a test match. Provoked, Saria sent him flying a good distance with a blow. The others sitting nearby also trembled. Saria lectured them with great authority. Who gave you permission to make excuses? If you consider hitting an unarmed person a test match, then what just happened was also a test match, right? She pointed her sword directly at Belder's eye, disappointed and unforgiving. Go and never come back. All of you from now on, never call yourselves students of this dojo again. Belder's group obeyed and then helped each other out. Saria immediately turned back and knelt sincerely. I apologize for that. It seems my former students have caused you a lot of trouble. Gray didn't want to hold a grudge. There's no need to worry, ma'am. She sincerely thanked him for his kindness. Then she got down to business. Earlier, I heard you wanted a recommendation to the academy, and Gray didn't deny it. Saria pulled a wooden sword from the rack to apologize for the trouble Belder and that lot caused. Before I write a recommendation letter, I need to verify your abilities. Having said that, she handed the sword to Gray Lai, and he immediately complied, understood. The two began their sparring match, with Saria being generous. You strike first. Come at me when you're ready. Without wasting a single second, Gray Lee attacked. Here I come. Gray used his speed, and Saria skillfully defended. Watching the attacks, she couldn't help but evaluate him. His true swordsmanship was very realistic for his age, as if he had already been through countless battles. Gray continued to fight with all his might, suddenly lowering his body. Then he attacked from the side, and Saria acknowledged that talent, Belder and those guys were nowhere near his level. Gray's movements were very sharp with no wasted motion. This style was mostly self-taught, but occasionally, the sword strokes were very similar to what is taught at the academy. Saria began to feel curious. Had someone taught him? But it was still very raw. He had talent, but she felt satisfied with this new student. He was a diamond in the rough. Saria started to fight seriously. It's a shame to end it here, but it's time for the curtains to close. Now she was even faster than before. Gray didn't give in either, and immediately ran past the instructor. With her keen senses, she countered the move. Gray grasped Saria's movements. Not only did he dodge the strike, but he even kept up with her pace. His spirit left her constantly questioning, how strange. He still hasn't wavered. How can he possibly keep up with me? Saria's body began to succumb to fatigue, and she faltered. I only wanted to test his ability a little, but why am I giving it my all now, and why am I? She froze, afraid of this child. Gray swung his sword with a powerful strike, forcing her to retreat. Saria hesitated. I have a bad feeling. That was just a powerful swing, right? After the slash, the floor cracked. Saria felt excited and declared, let's end it here. But that confidence was quickly cut short. She was shocked to see that her sword had been snapped by Gray's strike. Caught off guard by the current situation, Saria couldn't react in time and could only stammer out a cry. Immediately after, the image of her wooden sword hilt lay rolling on the cold wooden floor. Looking at the scene before him, Gray thought to himself, ah, it feels just like back then, so I possess that power now too. Suddenly, a wave of intense pain hit him. The pain came so unexpectedly that he collapsed to the ground with a loud cry. Witnessing his abnormality, Saria asked in concern, what happened? Are you okay? Gray, with a pained expression, gritted his teeth and speculated, my body can't keep up with that power. Instantly, Gray tried to appear stable and stood up shakily, managing to stammer out, I'm okay. With his face covered in sweat, he lamented in his head, I can't even stand steady. I shouldn't use this power recklessly. Looking at the person in front of him, he hesitated. Should I tell her about this? Sensing Gray's unusual look, Saria frowned in confusion. After adjusting his state, he quickly dismissed his momentary thought. No, it's best not to. Even if he told her, she would find it hard to believe, and it was something he couldn't even control himself. Seeing the awkward situation, Gray confusedly scratched his head and explained to Saria, I just got a bit distracted. Hearing Gray say that, Saria remained silent as if she couldn't believe her eyes. She was stunned by the sword he had broken and secretly speculated. Clearly, breaking my sword with a blunt piece of wood is absolutely impossible. Finally, she made a judgment. Surely he realized it too. Seeing Saria motionless for a long time, Gray began to feel panicked. He asked hesitantly, is something wrong? The more she observed the small boy in front of her, the more her anxiety about him grew, but didn't he intend to talk about it? While thinking, she closed her eyes and looked serious for a long time. After finishing her thoughts, she turned away, went over to the trash can and threw away the broken wooden sword, then said, all right, you said you wanted a recommendation to the academy, right? Hearing her question, he showed a tense face and replied, yes, I heard you could do that. As soon as he finished speaking, Saria spoke up to confirm, yes, of course I can recommend you to the most prestigious academy in the kingdom, the Royal Swordsmanship Academy. After speaking, she paused for a moment and hesitantly offered her view, but I advise you not to go there." For a moment her expression darkened and she lowered her voice, stating once more, "You are not suited for that place." Her words felt like they dragged Gray's mood down into a dark, silent abyss. He gripped the wooden sword in his hand tightly, his mind filled with resentful thoughts. "I know, it's because I'm not strong enough. In the end, I could hardly do anything except for that final moment." As if understanding his thoughts, she immediately spoke up to dispel his disappointment. "The place you should go is the World Union Academy." Her firm statement shocked him so much that his pupils contracted. Once again, her voice broke through his confusion as she confirmed where he needed to go. "It's not the most prestigious academy in the kingdom, but the most prestigious academy in the world." Her words made him jump in shock, thinking, "The World Union Academy? Isn't that where the Sword Saint and the others came from?" Surprised by the information he just received from her, he asked back in loud excitement, "Can someone like me really be accepted there?" Saria shook her head helplessly and said, "No, it's impossible." Then she explained to Gray his current situation. "You must have realized it yourself, that your current body is completely unfit to become a swordsman." She put on a serious face as if evaluating him and spoke solemnly. "If it were the Royal Academy, you might be able to get by thanks to your skills, but at the World Union Academy, that's not going to happen. How could you reach that level with such a weak body?" Unable to refute those harsh words, he stammered in response, "I guess you're right." For a moment, disappointment flared in his eyes as heavy thoughts began to fill his head. "Everyone who gets into that academy is a true monster. With this body, I don't even have a chance to compete." Under the soft light of the room, Saria appeared with a cold face and spoke chillingly with disappointment. "Giving up already. There are still 9 months until the qualification exam." Knowing exactly how much time he had, Gray replied confusedly, "Only 9 months." Saria agreed, yes, perhaps not enough time. Then she added with a firm attitude, "But trust in me." She growled threateningly, "Over these next 9 months, are you ready to endure the torture?" Gray looked at his palms and replied vaguely, "I don't really want to endure torture, but I will." Clenching his hand against his chest, Gray declared heroically, "I look forward to your guidance over the next 9 months." Receiving a satisfactory answer, Saria flashed a smug smile and said, "That's a good answer." The atmosphere suddenly grew quiet. Gray trembled as he listened to Saria speak. "Now then." Saria revealed a terrifying expression and added in a threatening tone, "Let the days of hell begin." True to her word, the images of Gray's grueling days soon followed, accompanied by Saria's tough attitude. In the images, she was constantly yelling, "Eat." Time flew by and 8 months had passed. After such a long period of training, Gray's body had become much more toned. Seeing his current condition, Saria thoughtfully praised him. "You've gotten much stronger." Pride was evident on her face as she smiled slightly, arms crossed. "I have nothing left to teach you. From now on, walk forward with confidence." Gray was momentarily stunned, surprise in his eyes, but there's still a month until the exam. Seeing his surprise, Saria explained, "Testing in an unfamiliar place will be difficult for you, so it's best to get there early." After explaining, she reached out and handed him a brown pouch. "This is for your travel expenses and enough money for food for a month." Sensing her formality, he clumsily waved his hands in refusal. "But leaving a full month early, isn't that too soon?" Golden sunlight streamed through the small windows, lengthening the shadows of the teacher, and student as Gray expressed his view. "It feels like you're trying to kick me out of the village." A slight smile brushed her lips, blending with her half-closed eyes as she calmly comforted him. "You're overthinking." Suddenly, Gray brought up something that startled Saria. "I heard a goblin den was found nearby. And there aren't many guards in the village either." Upon hearing this, Saria didn't deny it, but gently replied, "Ah, that's right, they did find a den." With a look of surprise and awkwardness, she quickly turned away to avoid the subject and calmly explained, "But it has nothing to do with us." She smiled slightly to reassure him. "There will be reinforcements from the capital, so we don't need to worry." She then quickly calmed his anxieties. "Just go take the exam, don't worry." As if he had guessed everything, Gray thought seriously, "She's lying. There would be no reinforcements for the village, and before the village was destroyed, his master would perish." The image of Saria, her body covered in blood, lying still on the ground, flashed in Gray's mind, along with the thought, "They said she was killed when she charged into their den on her own." Despite that, Gray acted as if he knew nothing and replied nonchalantly, "I understand." His agreement came so easily that Saria found it hard to believe. Instantly, Gray raised a hand to his chest to express his gratitude to Saria. "Thank you." Gray used a determined look filled with confidence to declare, "I'm off." Hearing that, Saria silently curled the corners of her lip. With a heartfelt smile, Saria sent her blessings to her little apprentice. "I hope you pass the exam." After Gray left, Saria quietly walked into the depths of the forest. where the image of the night sky with a hazy moon in the center appeared clearly. Along with that was a dry skeleton with a sword stuck right through its mouth. Saria touched the blood trail on the ground and muttered, according to the scout's report. Following the elongated blood trail, she made a judgment. They're over there. Suddenly, a voice appeared in the quiet darkness, startling her. Where are you going? As the voice ended, a familiar silhouette appeared on a tall, dark tree branch. It was Gray. He put on a look of concern and pretended to ask, Master. Gray was moving along when suddenly a loud call rang out behind him. Gray. He turned around and suddenly saw Saria. She asked, Why are you here? Shouldn't you be on your way to the academy? Upon hearing this, he jumped down from the tree branch and said, I'm the one who should be asking that. I thought you said the goblin den would be handled by the capital's troops. Saria waved her hand and replied, They said they couldn't come due to an emergency, so I intended to handle it alone. She added, Anyway, I'm enough on my own. Thanks to the scout's report, I know the strength of that den. After speaking, she sighed, Their boss is a high-level goblin, and there are a total of 40 to 50 monsters in that den. I have to admit, with those numbers, it's a bit troublesome. He listened and pondered, a high-level goblin. No, it's just powerful itself. He stayed at the battlefield and assessed, but the true strength of goblins lies in their intelligence and leadership. He added, If you're surrounded, fighting alone is no different than committing suicide. He still didn't stop thinking, and there's one thing I'm sure of. He looked at her and affirmed, If I let my master go alone, she won't return alive, and the village will be destroyed by them. He emphasized, I have witnessed that future with my own eyes. Finishing his thoughts, he spoke up, Let me come with you. But Saria blocked him, saying, I already said I'm enough on my own. Gray's eyes were extremely determined. I don't want to miss the opportunity to gain combat experience. Or do you think I'll get in the way? She explained, You know yourself that you won't get in my way. I couldn't even defeat you in our sparring match. She turned slightly and added softly, But who knows how it will be in actual combat, especially when a monster den suddenly appears like this. She firmly asserted, For something this dangerous, it's best to wait until you have a bit of combat experience. But he remained extremely resolute, his voice cold. So you really want to go alone? If that's the case, I have an idea. She quickly asked back, What idea? He stepped forward and said, I'll fight you and quickly take you down. Then he dropped a forceful line, and then handle the goblins myself. The space fell into silence. He was quiet, and so was she. The sword in his hand was still pointed straight at her. She smiled slightly and replied, All right, I give up. She cautioned him, But you must promise me one thing, no matter what happens. She looked at him, You must return safely. Hearing this, he lowered his sword. Fine. That's what I intended to do anyway. Having said that, the two slowly made their way deep into the forest. You too, master, don't die, of course. The scene shifted to the context of the goblin den. The two chatted as they walked. The terrain leaves no room for retreat. They are really confident, daring to set up a den in a place like this. He observed and assessed, We can't escape either. The monsters we're facing this time are intelligent. We must be very careful, she replied softly. I know. Her eyes gradually grew cold. They hurriedly scouted the situation. I don't see the boss anywhere. It must be in the tent, they whispered. Let's hope we can reduce their numbers before the boss appears. She whispered, Gray, take down every monster you see in that direction. They looked at the camp packed with goblins. They discussed tactics. I'll handle this side. The goblins looked absolutely hideous. He replied, Understood, and she said, Good. With that, the two dashed forward. Let's go. A goblin caught a scent of something and spun around. Immediately, Saria lunged forward. She swung her sword, cleanly decapitating the monster. The goblin behind it witnessed this and growled in anger. The whole group of goblins turned into chaos. Then they began to gather and came swarming forward one after another. On this side, Gray was equally fierce. He raised his sword lightly. Then he made a clean slash that left the goblins with no time to react. Blood splattered everywhere. The scene was chaotic. On this side, Saria didn't lag behind either. She fought off a dense swarm of goblins. Just then, Gray lunged forward, cutting down the goblins with one swing. The two paused. Corpses lay scattered all around them. She praised him from the side. Not bad. Is this really your first time? He cautioned. Be careful, master. We've only just begun. He looked around, bewildered. That's strange. He examined the situation. They're too weak. If that's the case, master should have been able to handle them easily. Suddenly a thought occurred to him, unless, inside that tent. He cast his eyes toward the tent in the distance. It seemed a pair of blood-red eyes was monitoring every move they made. A hideous pair of eyes. He looked at them and felt a chill down his spine. He turned and shouted at Saria. Quick, let's go run, she asked softly. What's wrong? But he seemed to be losing his composure. Just run. She was also stunned but still followed him. She replied, "All right then," and the two began to run for their lives. Behind him, a goblin was in pursuit. His eyes widened. Behind his back now was a goblin that looked incredibly strong. Every time its foot hit the ground, stones and debris flew up. A sinister smile spread across his mouth. Under the high moon of the dark night, he said, "A high-level goblin," and she added, "It's an honor that the boss came looking for us itself." But he suddenly shouted, "No, that's not the boss, the real boss." A hideous mouth gaped wide open. Behind them, a mob of goblins swarmed forward. They growled and shrieked in disarray. She suddenly panicked. "What is that?" He spoke up, an entity stronger than all others, a high-level goblin. He affirmed, "A goblin warlord." He explained, "That is the real boss." A mob of goblins was approaching, axes in hand, followed by the boss. That was truly the boss of this den. The boss was massive and many times stronger. She finally came to her senses. A goblin warlord. This isn't the type of monster we can handle. She frowned, her heart full of turmoil. She yelled at the high-level goblin in front of her, "Kill this one and run, quick." She swung her sword, slashing toward it. But she froze in place. She continued to slash. Blood gushed from its arm. It was a hit. Before she could even celebrate, suddenly its arm began to regenerate. She was bewildered. The wound. It's healing itself. He lunged forward then, saying, "It's useless." He added, "The roar of a goblin warlord can boost the power and recovery speed of its allies." He emphasized, "That's why they are unusually strong. It seems we won't be able to destroy any of these goblins at all." He kept slashing and then hit upon an idea. He said, "Master, leave the goblin behind to me. You don't need to kill it, just stall for time." She turned around, surprised. "What are you planning to do?" He was extremely cold. "There's only one option left, isn't there?" He let out a chilling statement, "That is to destroy that bastard." His mouth curled into a sinister, arrogant smile. Gray Lay swung his sword toward the monster in front of him. As he fought, he thought to himself, "It's so annoying that they keep trying to ambush me." Then he slashed once more toward the monster. The demon didn't give in either. It immediately raised its axe and slashed toward Gray Lay. As he parried, he was calculating his next move. "Now, I just need to focus on wiping out all the enemies in front of me." But the very next second, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Gray Lee's sword shattered into many small pieces the moment he swung it down. Gray Lee looked at the remaining hilt in his hand with an incredulous expression. "My sword couldn't withstand a strike against an enhanced goblin." The goblin didn't have the patience to wait for Gray to recover. It immediately swung its axe with great force into the ground, sending Gray Lee reeling backward from the impact. He quickly drew his second sword to fight it. "Lucky I brought a spare, though this one won't last long either." From a distance, Saria, who was also battling goblins, shouted, "Gray Lee, use my spare sword." Receiving the sword, Gray felt as though he had gained newfound strength. "Thank you." He held the two swords in his hands, preparing for a life-or-death battle with the goblin. "I have 2 blades now, but it's still not enough to sweep through all the monsters, but against the warlord and the goblins in the middle." He sheathed one of the swords into his scabbard. He instantly flew toward the goblin, slashing a large arc of light. "It's more than enough." The goblin didn't give up either. It swung its axe straight at Gray Lee's face, wounding his cheek. Gray tried using his sword to parry the goblin's axe blade. He gritted his teeth, letting out a sound of impatience. Immediately after, he drew another sword from his back and fought with all his might against the goblins that were swarming toward him. A beam of light awakened from the horrific skull. A goblin shrieked, its eyes emitting rays of yellow light. Gray was also surprised by the sight in front of him. What? Following that, a series of other goblins were buffed. Is it strengthening them as well? After being powered up, the goblin continued to swing its axe toward Gray. He could only try to fend off its immense strength. "You've seen through my plan." The leader goblin shrieked, and instantly, dozens of goblins rushed toward Gray. He mused to himself, "Your intelligence really isn't just for show." Gray's sword clashed against the goblin's sharp axe, sending small sparks flying everywhere. And after a while of intense parrying, Gray finally managed to break free from the goblin's axe. He stepped back to gain momentum and commanded, "Bring it on." He flew rapidly through the goblins, leaving them unable to realize what was happening. Gray tried to swing his sword to take down as many goblins as possible. "I don't have time to deal with these." But suddenly, Gray was held back by a goblin. Another one flew in from somewhere, swinging an axe straight at Gray, intending to finish him off. But it rushed headlong into Gray's sword and died on the spot. Finally, he realized the goblin's intent. They were trying to break his sword by ramming their heads into. Gray suddenly looked up as something blocked the faint light from reaching his face. A ferocious goblin was swinging a massive fist toward Gray. However, he managed to use his sword just in time to block its attack. But Gray was heavily impacted by the force of that punch. He was sent flying into the distance as dust billowed everywhere. Gray coughed up a mouthful of blood, his face covered in injuries. He slowly struggled to sit up amidst the heap of broken rocks and rubble surrounding him, unable to suppress a groan of pain. He cast his eyes toward his last remaining sword, thinking that now he was down to his final blade. Gray slowly stood up and faced the pack of goblins before him, wondering if he really had to face an entire horde and a goblin general with just one sword. Gray lowered his head slightly, but relying on the experiences he gained before his regression. He knew and helplessly admitted to himself that he couldn't win. Despite knowing the outcome, Gray still picked up his final sword. If that was the case, he turned toward Saria and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Master, run. While they're focused on me, run." Saria just gave a slight smirk on her side. She gripped her own sword tightly and replied, "Sorry, but I can't do that." Gray struggled to dodge the goblin's attacks while continuing to plead with Saria, "Are you planning to die for nothing? Master, I'll run right after you. Don't worry about me." Saria slowly responded, "It's not that." Something flickered momentarily in Saria's eyes. Saria looked helplessly at the wound on her thigh and said, "I can't run anymore." Hearing this, Gray couldn't believe his ears and turned back to look at her in despair. Gray looked at the final sword left in his hand, thinking he was out of options. He then decided to fight a life-and-death battle against the goblins, remembering that he regressed to destroy the Purge. He tried to swing his chipped sword at the goblin, hopping to put up some kind of resistance. But then he looked at the shattered fragments of his sword before him with a look of utter helplessness. Was everything really going to end here, in a place like this? Gray stood there, completely without weapons to defend himself, ignored by the goblins surrounding him. But he still refused to give up, tightly clutching the remaining hilt in his hand. No, it wasn't over yet. If only he could use the power from that time. He remembered an image of his past self, who had also been pushed into a corner, just like he was now. If he could just unlock it, it wouldn't matter if there was a whole horde of them. As the blade shattered into large pieces, Gray tried to remind himself, remember how it felt back then. Gray raised the sword, which was now just a short stump, in front of him. He closed both eyes tightly. Suddenly, a surge of red power finally awake. Gray gently delivered a single slash across the necks of every goblin. The sword in his hand had now transformed into a thick black aura. Saria was incredibly shocked by the sight. Gray. He stood there, his face stained with blood. Yet he looked back at her with a bright smile to reassure her. It's okay now. Immediately after, Gray swung his sword repeatedly, making the goblins fall one after another. Even the strongest goblin was sliced clean in half. The goblin chief saw this and couldn't believe his eyes. Saria was the same. She couldn't believe her disciple could awaken such a massive power. On her side, she only needed one hand to block the goblin's large axe. She calmly turned and taunted it, "Too light." Then a flash of light emitted from Saria's eyes. "You guys really put me through hell." Saria gave a simple flick of her hand, and the goblin was sent tumbling backward by that power. Saria thought to herself that without the general to buff their strength, they were absolutely nothing. It was past midnight when the two finally defeated the entire goblin horde. Gray spoke up, "Somehow, we managed to." He then held out the broken sword in front of him. "I'm sorry, I broke your sword." Saria replied calmly, "Don't worry about it, you saved my life." She then reached out to take back the sword, but Gray. That attack just now, Saria didn't get to finish her sentence. Gray collapsed and lay motionless on the ground. Saria rushed over to check on him, shouting, "Gray." Gray slowly woke up and wondered, "Where am I?" He looked around to see nothing but thick black water everywhere. He looked at the thing in front of him, a door, and then a plume of black smoke suddenly appeared. Gray looked at the door floating before his eyes. This is. Then he realized it was that power. The door in front of him continued to emit clouds of black gas. If he opened it, would he receive that power? Gray thought seriously to make a decision for himself. Then he slowly took one step at a time toward the door. As soon as he touched the door, some force seized him, leaving his whole body frozen. Gray immediately recoiled, moving away from the door. He clutched his hand to his chest, struggling to breathe. He didn't know why. But he knew for certain that if he opened this door right now, a tear ran down from the corner of Gray's eye. "I will die." A notification appeared. "Wise decision." Gray seemed to awaken to something at that moment, his eyes widening to their limit. Gray's mind finally returned to reality. He opened his eyes, gasping, and realized he was lying on a small bed. Saria looked at him and softly called out, "Gray, you're awake." Gray asked, "Where am I?" Saria stood by his hospital bed, the village infirmary. "You've been unconscious for 5 days. I was afraid you wouldn't wake up again." Gray put his hand to his forehead, slowly accepting what was happening in reality. So he had slept for 5 days, he had overexerted himself, and it must have affected his body. Saria replied, I don't think overexerting yourself is the right way to describe what you did. Gray sat up and Saria kindly checked on him. Forget about that. Is your body okay? Can you get up? Gray replied, let's see, and then realized something was wrong with his body. He couldn't put any strength into his right arm. He could move it if he tried his absolute hardest, but he wondered if he could ever hold a sword with this arm again. Then he saw black marks on his bandaged arm and this birthmark. Saria also realized he couldn't move his arm. It doesn't move very well, does it? He wondered if she couldn't see it. Then Gray answered Saria, it's hard to use strength in my dominant arm. Saria replied as if she already knew the answer, just as I thought, it won't heal normally anytime soon. I mean, all the bones in your right arm were shattered. Gray touched his body all over. My bones were shattered, but it doesn't seem to hurt at all. Saria pointed to a potion bottle on the table. We treated you with magic medicine. Gray was incredibly surprised to see the potion, magic medicine. Isn't that extremely expensive? Saria sat down on the opposite bed to reassure Gray. Don't worry, the village chief gave it to us. Gray was shocked by her words. The village chief? Why would he give it to someone like me? Saria replied indifferently, what are you talking about? Gray, you're the hero of this village. Gray heard that but still didn't understand what she meant. Suddenly, a gray-haired man burst through the door and shouted his name, Gray. Gray was quite flustered to see the village chief. He clutched the potion bottle in his hand. Chief, thank you for the magic medicine. The man rushed to interrupt him. We're the ones who should be thanking you. We're talking about a goblin general here. That's an invulnerable monster. Even when all the forces from the surrounding towns gathered to fight it, a monster like that was targeting our village. The village chief rushed to the bedside and gripped Gray's hand. If you hadn't killed it, the village would have been destroyed. Saying this, he used both hands to tightly clasp Gray's hand. If it weren't for you and Saria, this medicine, this infirmary, and even the lives of the villagers you saved, none of it would exist anymore. Gray heard this and replied bashfully, you're exaggerating, sir. The chief was still full of gratitude toward Gray. You know I'm not overstating it. Gray looked down at the magic potion bottle in his hand. He thought to himself that perhaps the chief was right. In the world before he went back in time, this village should have been destroyed by the goblin attack. The village chief stood up and bowed respectfully. If you still don't realize the significance of what you've done, then I'd be happy to explain it in detail. Pausing for a moment, he continued, I was told you'll be taking the entrance exam for the World Union Academy. Is that correct? Gray replied bashfully, yes. He suddenly realized something and held his chin in deep thought. He had gone to kill the goblins 1 week before the exam. If he had slept for 5 days, then there were only 2 days left. Gray's expression became even more serious. It took 3 days on foot to get to the World Union Academy, and while he could get there in 1 day by horse, he didn't have that kind of money. Thinking of this, Gray quickly turned to the chief and asked loudly, I'm sorry, chief, but could you lend me a horse? The village chief turned to head outside, saying as he went, I knew you'd say that, so I already prepared the best horse in the village for you. With that horse's speed, you'll be there in no time. Saria joined in on this side. If you hadn't woken up today, we were planning to carry you there ourselves. Gray slowly got out of bed and reached out to open the door to take in the natural light outside. Then he realized a surprise was waiting for him outside. Gray stepped out, and in front of him were hundreds of villagers standing and cheering to celebrate his awakening. Everyone together held up a banner and joyfully shouted, Thank you, you have to pass the exam. Others said, thank you for saving the whole village. A man walked up to him and handed him a small pouch. Gray, please accept this. He reached out to take the small cloth pouch and asked, what is this? The person replied, it's what the whole village pitched in for you. We heard the registration fee for the World Union Academy is very expensive. Gray suddenly didn't know how to respond. Everyone, thank you all so much. He then prepared to set off. Before leaving, he said to everyone, if I fail the exam now, I'll have a hard time coming back. Saria heard this and reassured him, no need to worry. She turned her head and looked at him with a confident expression. Not a single one of the candidates at the World Union Academy could beat a goblin general. Even so, Gray felt a bit insecure. He reached up to touch his immobile arm, but with my right arm like this. Saria remained full of confidence and comforted Gray. Your left arm still works fine, doesn't it? Gray tested his left arm. Yes, but... Saria cut him off. That's more than enough. Besides, you won't even need to use that power. Gray turned to get on the horse, but the entrance exam might not be easy enough that I can pass with just one arm. Saria approached Gray. It's okay. The Academy's examiners aren't blind enough to overlook your ability. I guarantee it. She looked straight into his eyes, her voice full of confidence. You will definitely pass. Gray felt somewhat empowered. Thank you very much. After you've said that, I can't afford to fail now. This village had been destroyed in the previous world, but it still existed here right now. This world was no longer like the old one. The future could be changed with this power. Gray turned to look at the villagers one last time and said his goodbyes. I'm off. Not long after, Gray arrived at the exam location. He patted his horse. Thanks, buddy. Thanks to you, I made it on time. Gray looked at the massive castle in front of him. So that was the World Union Academy. Before Gray, the massive building of the World Union Academy stood tall against the blue sky. Amidst the clear blue sky, the examiner's voice suddenly rang out. We will now begin distributing the exam papers. Until this process is complete, all candidates must remain in the central arena. As soon as the examiner finished, a flurry of whispers broke out among those below. Are we all candidates? But only about 20 of us will pass. Someone was talking about previous exams. I heard the number of passing candidates changes a lot each year. Some years they take 50 people, and some years only one person passes. Once again, the examiner's voice rang out, drowning out the noise below. Now, please welcome Professor Ariel. Without making everyone wait long, a figure with long red hair appeared before the eyes of many impressed people. She smiled mysteriously and said, "Let's begin right away. We will now start distributing the exam papers. Candidates, please take the sheet of paper appearing before you." Suddenly, she snapped her fingers. A strange golden light suddenly appeared overhead. In front of Gray, a sheet of paper was gradually created completely from that mysterious golden light. Gray quickly reached out to take it. Suddenly, his information appeared on the paper. Candidate number 513. Seeing that everyone had received theirs, Professor Ariel looked down from above and reminded them, "It seems everyone has theirs. Some of you might be surprised to see nothing written on it except your number and zone. Rest assured, it's like this every year." Above all, the professor solemnly re-emphasized the rules of the exam. The World Union Academy does not discriminate based on age, gender, nationality, status, or anything else. She reached out to grip the edge of the table and said decisively, "Even your name." Immediately after, she gave a dark smile and said, "Is not important to us." The entrance to the academy appeared imposing in the middle of the path, along with the voices from the professors associated with it. Only those who pass the exam and earn the right to cross the bridge will be asked for their name. You can even give us a fake name if you wish. Looking at the exam paper in his hand, Gray thought to himself with dissatisfaction, I left my sword at the inn, yet it says I'm still in the swordsmanship zone. What kind of system is this? As if knowing everyone was reading the prompt, Ariel spoke with an arrogant attitude. Furthermore, I have assigned your zones based on the way I look at you. She said coldly and threateningly, if I'm mistaken, please raise your hand. Hearing the professor's declaration, people started to panic and retort. Did she choose the zones for us just by looking? She must be joking, right? No way she can do that with this many people. Then they drew conclusions as if they knew everything. They must have checked us beforehand, or maybe she used some kind of mind-reading magic on us. Seeing no one raise their hand, the professor looked satisfied. It seems no one is in the wrong zone. Once the waiting time was over, she gave instructions to those preparing for the exam. Next, I will announce your exam schedules. Please check your tickets. Gray immediately grabbed the exam paper in his hand to check his exam details, and a line of black text appeared on the paper. Candidate number 513, Sword Fighting Zone, first day, 11:00 a.m. Seeing the information on the paper, he panicked and muttered to himself, "Damn it, I'm competing on the very first day. I was hoping to have a bit more time for my hand to heal." After a long silence, the professor wore a terrifying expression, then looked down seriously and gave a warning and a deterrent. This is a one-time practical exam. If you arrive late, you will be automatically disqualified. Please make sure you arrive on time. We will not accept personal requests for schedule changes. Meanwhile, Gray was clutching his hand, constantly worried. I still can't exert much strength with my dominant arm. Please, let it heal by tomorrow, just a little bit. In the blink of an eye, the next day arrived. Arriving at the exam site, Gray looked at his injured arm and grew increasingly frightened. It hasn't healed at all. I guess I have to compete with my arm like this. Suddenly, the examiner's voice echoed, snapping Gray out of his thoughts and making him just mumble in agreement. Next candidate, please wait at the arena entrance. To try and regain his composure, Gray took a deep breath to comfort himself. All right, no, I shouldn't be pessimistic about this right now. He held his right hand and thought, my left arm works perfectly fine, and I can still move my right arm to some extent. After regaining his calm, he quickly thought of a way to get through the exam in fits and starts. I need to use the remaining time to observe the examiner's movements, find a weakness, and in front of him, a fencing match between the examiner and a contestant appeared, and the examiner began, "You may strike first." The contestant fighting didn't hesitate to reply, "All right." Having said that, he didn't wait but immediately grabbed his sword and shouted as he charged at the examiner. He swung his sword, hitting the wooden floor and creating a loud noise and a dense, white smoke. As the thick white smoke began to disperse, the image of the examiner standing motionless and completely unfazed by him gradually appeared. Seeing that the examiner wasn't even slightly injured, he became determined and shouted loudly, "Damn, I'm not finished yet." As soon as he finished, he angrily put all his strength into his sword to swing it at the examiner. However, upon seeing that the examiner could still easily block his sword strike, he panicked and said, "Impossible." In the blink of an eye, his sword was knocked away by the examiner. The image of both the man and his sword flying far away seemed too fast to block. He was knocked down, hitting the wooden floor with such force that it sounded like an explosion. Clutching his arm in pain, unable to stand up, his face pale with disbelief, before he could recover, a cold voice rang out, waking him to reality. "Your exam is over. You may retrieve your weapon and leave the site." He heard this and his face clearly showed disappointment as he muttered, "Understood." Witnessing the scene, Gray curled his lips slightly. Immediately, he froze in place, deep despair crashing down on his mind. "I'm finished." Then the examiner's urging voice rang out as if to wake him from his daydream. "Next, number 513. He replied sternly, "Yes." Then he secretly reminisced, "You told me to fight a person who just defeated someone much bigger than me." As if preset, this time the examiner started the match with the same phrase as the previous contestant, "You may strike first." And upon hearing it, Gray replied seriously, "All right." Even though he was standing on the arena floor, Gray couldn't help but tremble, trying to comfort himself. "Honestly, I don't feel like I have a chance, but I will still do everything I can." Breaking free from his wandering thoughts, he immediately grabbed his sword and charged straight at the spot where the examiner was standing, shouting, "Here I come." As he ran, he recalled what Saria had taught him. A sword is not just swung with your arm. You channel the strength generated by your whole body through your arm. Carrying determination and faith in himself, Gray decided to follow the hope that Saria had planted. "That's what you taught me, right, master? Even when my right arm is weak, if I can channel strength through my other muscle." In the blink of an eye, his sword-wielding hand swung up. The strike missed the examiner. Not stopping there, contradiction began to creep into his mind. "But I can't fight the way I usually do." If you can swing a sword that easily without arm strength, then no one would bother training their body from the start. The image of the examiner appeared. He suddenly swung his sword at Gray. While observing the movement of the sword in the examiner's hand, he gradually discovered something. The examiner's sword, it seems a bit slow. After discovering the examiner's weakness, he immediately blocked his sword. Fighting while contemplating, he found a solution. He has terrifying strength, but his speed and technique are nowhere near mastered. If I rely on the swordsmanship I learned from her, I can compensate for the difference in arm strength. Finding the appropriate solution, his thoughts were interrupted by action. In that case, he continuously used swift sword strikes to engage the examiner. That helped him confirm the accuracy of his reasoning. That's right, he's definitely slower. Suddenly hit by unexpected sword strikes, the examiner became grimacing and flustered. Always in a state of high concentration, Gray calmly judged, "He's not as strong as I thought." Saria's familiar, bright, and cheerful smile appeared in Gray's mind, along with her confident statement, "You will definitely pass." Right now, he only remembered Saria's noble role, a teacher. The encouragement from Saria gave Gray more strength and belief. With a face full of determination, he poured all his strength into it and successfully knocked away the examiner's sword. With a burning heart, he thought, "I think I really can do this." The match between the two was extremely fierce. It could be called a speed battle. The teacher's attacks were steady and unrelenting, while Gray kept his defense high. Gray was still at a disadvantage, even though he had figured out his opponent. "Even though I've seen through the examiner's swordsmanship." Gray gripped his sword tightly, preparing to counterattack. Then, without hesitation, he attacked the teacher's shoulder, but due to his extensive experience, the teacher easily dodged. Gray began to hesitate, but had no intention of giving up. He pondered, "The strength gap is still too large. I can't break through his sword stance. It's truly not easy to win with just one arm." Gray attacked continuously, using his fastest speed, until the teacher finally showed a gap. Gray quickly seized the situation. "That's all fine, but his movements are becoming clumsy. It's a bit risky, but if I do it right now." Without thinking much, Gray suddenly pulled his sword back, causing the teacher to lose his footing. He prepared for his plan. "Now, come on." Just as expected, he lunged forward. His eyes showed clear confidence. "Hit. You swung that strike too hard and it was easy to predict." He stepped back into a defensive stance. There was nothing more exposed than such a huge, sloppy strike. Despite the defensive stance, he didn't block. Instead, he nimbly circled behind the teacher, causing him to panic. Seeing the teacher fall into a passive state, Gray rejoiced. No matter how big the strength difference is, as long as I can get behind him. Gray relied on his speed to dash quickly. The referee's voice rang out, "Stop." Just a moment short of time, he could have caused damage to his opponent. The blade was only a layer of thin fabric away from the teacher. Gray was unwilling to accept it. His body was exhausted. Is the match over already? Isn't it a bit too early to stop? The referee stood on the podium and announced the result. Match time is over. With this, the result is a draw. Gray was disappointed upon hearing the result. He stood stunned. He felt helpless, knowing it couldn't be changed. I was too late. He trembled as he held the sword, then relaxed his grip, accepting it. Gray resignedly turned his back and left the arena, whispering to himself, I tried my best. But if I can't even beat him then, I will face many more difficulties later on. Gray regretfully looked back at the arena, his heart filled with deep sadness. Thank you, teacher. A week after the match, in conference room 53 at the World Union Academy, inside the large room were 6 members. They were the organizing committee, the people who made the evaluations. The bespectacled old man, the school principal, asked, "What do you think about the candidates? They have now completed the exam." The brown-haired man replied indifferently, tired. Beside him, an elderly teacher cautiously offered an opinion. I find this method of everyone observing to be a bit inefficient. It would be better to distribute the work next year. The mustached old man in the room only focused on benefits. We cannot miss out on talent just to save our own energy. The principal could only feel helpless at the members' callousness. I asked for opinions about the students, not about the exam system. Let's start with the swordsmanship training course. Small frames began to appear on the desk, and someone asked, who passed? The elderly teacher remained cautious, analyzing and taking opinions from everyone. As usual, those who defeat the examiner pass. The rest are evaluated based on the quality of their performance and their ability to hold out for 15 minutes. What do the swordsmanship teachers think? Aside from those who defeated the examiner, candidates 5, 217, and 753 stand out the most. The brown-haired man interrupted, keep the list to just that. Even if others pass, they won't be able to keep up with the class. The mustached man agreed, likely because it benefited him. I agree. Does anyone have a different opinion? The whole room was silent, without a single response. The principal spoke up. We have confirmed the list of accepted students for the swordsmanship course. Suddenly, someone proposed their own opinion. What about candidate number 513? That proposal caught his attention. It was the suggestion of the red-haired girl, who had been silent from the beginning. What does everyone think about candidate number 513? The man with the round sunglasses remained silent. The gloomy-looking man asked curiously, number 513, huh? The mustached old man pulled up the screen of Gray's match to examine it. This kid, huh? Looking at it, it seems like he's about to win. But if he has to rely on setting traps to defeat the examiner, it will be hard to keep up later on. His technique is good, but his strength is still too weak. I see that from start to finish, he was overwhelmed. The principal was puzzled. If so, then. The mustached man quickly stifled the thought of adding Gray. The red-haired girl sighed, feeling helpless. Looking at those people, she felt weary. So many people watching, and not a single one realized it. If everyone is this blind, then the method of having everyone observe might truly be a waste. The discussion ended, and the next day, everyone came to receive their result. Gray was also present. He held the notification paper in his hand. Candidate 513, Swordsmanship Course, first day, 11:00 a.m. On the clock tower, the loudspeaker sounded. We will now announce the list of accepted students for the Swordsmanship Course. A total of 6 candidates have been accepted. Gray Lee held the notification paper, hopping in his heart. This is it. The papers of the successful candidates will burn automatically. Candidate 5, Candidate 217, Candidate 432 and 615, Candidate 753 and 925. That is all. These 6 candidates have been accepted. Gray stood stunned, falling into despair. The loudspeaker continued. Successful candidates, please cross the bridge and complete your enrollment procedures today. The atmosphere was chaotic. Joy, sadness, and regret were all present. Gray felt sad, so I really failed. The loudspeaker announcement continued. Next is the announcement of the Divine Eye Special Admission spot. Candidate number 513. Unlike the accepted candidates, Gray Lee's paper was consumed by blue flames. Suddenly, he became the center of attention for the crowd. Looking at the burning paper, Gray was still doubtful. I passed. The people around him began to gossip, mostly with sarcasm. A Divine Eye Special spot, huh? They chose this method again this year. Gray Lee raised many questions in his head. A Divine Eye Special spot. First time I've ever heard of that. The mockery continued. especially from the accepted candidates. Isn't that just a backdoor way of getting favored? The World Union Academy has really gone downhill. The words crept into his mind, making Gray distracted. A backdoor. But I don't know anyone. Could it be thanks to my master? But I haven't heard anything. From the crowd, an old man with a cane stepped forward and reprimanded those with the wrong mindset. Hey, don't talk nonsense about the Divine Eye Special Spot like that. The Divine Eye Special Spot is a prestigious category that has created heroes for the past 100 years. They didn't care about the old man's words. Those old geezers are obsessed with the Divine Eye Spot. Isn't that just some old-fashioned story of glory? Besides that, there were other whispers. The people who passed with the Divine Eye recently were all failures. Amy White, Belle Albright, Leek Mueller, and Jacob Bloomfield, too. Gray didn't protest. He endured it silently, listening to the sarcasm. That's right, all failures. Even we, the current candidates, know that. The names just mentioned gave Gray a memorable feeling. He seemed to have a glimmer of hope. Amy White, Belle Albright, and Jacob Bloomfield. Those three were in the main force fighting against the liquidator, right? And now my name is mentioned along with them. Morning sunlight gently covered the entire academy, and everything seemed submerged in soft, quiet light. The main building appeared majestic amidst the thin mist. The surrounding canal flowed peacefully, and crowds of people busily entered. The school loudspeaker rang out. The entrance ceremony will begin in 30 minutes. If you have finished changing, please gather at the square in front of the main office. Groups of students in academy uniforms began appearing on the stone-paved path. Dark blue jackets with yellow trim stood out in the morning light, and on their left chests, the academy badge sparkled with silver light. Amidst the flow of students moving toward the square, one figure stood out above the rest. Gray walked with a calm demeanor, exuding a cold and unpredictable aura. A few students began to gather, with some confusedly looking around, asking the person next to them to make sure they were standing in the right place. The square in front of the main office, is this the right place? The friend was also puzzled. There's nothing here. Are we in the right spot? Suddenly, a figure rushed toward the group of students, the voice mixed with heavy, panting breaths. Sorry. Due to a slight mistake, the preparation work was delayed. The student asked, preparation. He continued, could you please step back a bit so I can put the staircase in that spot? Everyone looked at each other, confused by his request. The student stepped back as he requested, is this far enough? He turned to the group, smiling, that's enough. In that surprised and confused state, he knelt down in the middle of the schoolyard, placed his palms flat on the ground, and muttered, all right. A magic circle blazed to life, encompassing the entire space as intricately interwoven arcane lines radiated a golden light as blinding as a detonating sun. Streaks of orange-red lightning darted through the stream of light, creating a sense of violent, supernatural intensity. The ground trembled, and the air seemed compressed by a massive surge of energy on the verge of exploding. Those watching could only stare in wide-eyed amazement at a power that far exceeded their understanding. In an instant, everything vanished, leaving the sky clear as if after a storm, and he stood up abruptly before the stunned eyes of the crowd. He glanced at them, as calm as if nothing had ever happened, and said, sorry for the delay, everyone. Please just take a seat wherever you like. The students still couldn't believe their eyes, their lips trembling with shock as they managed a weak, yes, sir. They looked left and right, checking their surroundings. Some thought in confusion, was that teleportation just now? While others gritted their teeth in amazement, can they really teleport something that huge? Gray sat calmly in his chair, thinking to himself, they probably wanted to hold the entrance ceremony somewhere with a view of the school, but using teleportation like that is such a waste. He looked up with a radiant smile, as if he had just discovered something. So this is it, the power of the World Union Academy. Gray happened to overhear two people chatting nearby. These seats are a bit much, aren't they? If only 30 students were accepted, why do we need all these chairs? The short-haired girl gave a sheepish laugh. You didn't know about that. The other girl felt a bit slighted and replied, sorry, okay. I don't know much about anything outside of swordsmanship. The short-haired girl immediately smiled and offered, well, let me explain it to you. She twirled her finger to the rhythm of her voice. The World Union Academy, as the name suggests, is where the best students from all over the world gather. Suddenly she cheered, look, there they come. The other girl jumped and looked in the direction she was pointing. Her eyes widened in astonishment at the unbelievable sight before her. Amidst the high blue sky, massive airships glided silently through the clouds, their polished hulls reflecting the pale morning light. Their sails were full of wind, looking like majestic flying warships. Interspersed among the blimps were gargantuan winged creatures, dragons with massive bodies spreading their wings in flight. She screamed as she witnessed the dreamlike scene. What is this? The airships continued to fly by, towering and magnificent. Gray stared in amazement. The magic airship Strato Queen, I was on it once when I joined the Perger Annihilation team. I heard this is one of the largest airships in the world, and they brought it out just for an entrance ceremony. It truly lives up to the reputation of the World Union Academy. The airships touched down on the ground, sending dust flying in every direction. The crowd, every face looking sharp and determined, moved toward the gathering area. The principal was delighted to see everyone. Leaning his hands on the podium, he addressed them. It seems everyone has arrived. Well then, let us begin the entrance ceremony. The school's speakers crackled to life. Thank you, Mr. Principal, for those remarks. Gray sat with his arms crossed, yawning deeply, thinking, turns out the entrance ceremony at the World Union Academy isn't much different from a normal one. Then he looked over in surprise as a name was called. Next, we have greetings from the valedictorian of each department. Leonhardt, valedictorian of the swordsmanship department, please come forward to speak. The boy stood up and bowed politely. Yes, sir. Leonhardt walked down the steps amidst the whispers and praise of the crowd. Hey, that's him. Is he the one who defeated the examiner in a single blow during the practical exam? Exactly, I heard his swordsmanship level is already on par with the instructors. Leonhardt bowed deeply and placed a hand over his heart to greet the professor. That was Leonhardt Appias. He truly was an outstanding student, his face radiating an aura of absolute seriousness. Gray sighed, lost in thought about something. Leonhardt politely asked, "May I ask once more, may I speak freely?" The professor smiled and replied, "Of course." Having received permission, he said his thanks and turned sharply toward the seated student. I have something I want to say to the academy. First of all, to you students. No, to everyone who has been accepted through legitimate means. It is an honor to be enrolled alongside you all, he said, placing a hand on his chest to show his sincerity. He continued, so that we may graduate and become people who can contribute to the world. Let's all do our best together. I truly look forward to the days we spend moving forward together as students of this prestigious academy. But unfortunately, among us, there is one person who does not deserve to stand here. Isn't that right, God-eye Professor Ariel? She had been closing her eyes, enjoying the bustling atmosphere. When she suddenly heard her name called, she was slightly startled. But she regained her composure immediately and replied, "Every student here has passed a grueling selection exam. Even if they aren't as strong as you, it wouldn't be right to exclude them. And besides, why are you asking me that?" Leonhardt's face turned grim, a hint of fury in his eyes. I'm not talking about those who passed the exam fairly. I'm talking about the student who was favored by the professor and brought in through the God-eye direct admission category. The student who was admitted through favoritism, he shouted, pointing toward where the students were sitting and commanded, "Step forward, return your uniform, and leave this academy immediately." The crowd of students was in an uproar over Leonhardt's words. Gray was a bit worried. Why is he being so intense? Sheesh. Luckily, he doesn't know what I look like. If I just sit still, I won't be found out, right? Ariel laughed out loud. It seems the freshmen this year are quite lively. Gray remained indignant. "Professor, I'm being serious. Please stop with these backdoor admissions." A whoosh sounded, light as a breeze. Ariel's voice grew closer and closer until she was suddenly behind Leonhardt, whispering, "Do you really think you're stronger than that student?" Leonhardt's voice rang out across the sky. What? He gritted his teeth in frustration. Of course, could I possibly be wrong? Ariel chuckled with amusement. I like that attitude. In that case, let's have a wager. Leonhardt was surprised. A wager. Ariel crossed her arms, appearing strangely calm. That's right. Her lips curled into a confident smirk. I'll bet both my position as a professor and that student's admission slot. Gray was shocked by her words and felt a lump in his throat as he asked someone, a wager. Saria also didn't understand and asked Professor Ariel, "Are you planning to make me fight that special admission kid?" Ariel didn't even bother to open her eyes and waved her hand dismissively. I wouldn't do anything so crude. She then adjusted the frames of her glasses and opened her eyes to look directly at Saria. After all, if you went all out, you'd die. As a teacher, I can't let a student be in danger. A series of blue veins slowly popped out on Saria's face. His face darkened completely as he glared angrily and asked, "Are you provoking me?" Ariel didn't change her demeanor, her voice calm despite his anger. "I'm being serious, so let's bet on monsters instead of humans. It'll be safer that way." Pausing for a moment, she continued, "Besides, you're better at fighting monsters than people, aren't you?" Saria grew even more furious. "So you know all about that, do you? So what exactly are we betting?" Ariel gave a faint smile as if she had achieved her goal. Suddenly, a hand went up as Ariel spoke, saying, "Simple, just kill the monster I choose as the target." The professor proceeded to introduce the rules for each round. In each round, the monsters will get stronger. Whoever fails to kill the target first loses. Gray sat in his chair, helplessly rubbing his head as Ariel continued. If he loses, I will resign as professor, and all special admission students will be expelled. But if you lose, you'll have to do everything I say. Saria's defiant expression was reflected in Ariel's glasses. She acted as if nothing were wrong and held her hand out to Saria. Well, what do you say? He reached out to touch the sword at his hip. Tell me what the targets are first. While I'm confident I can handle any opponent, I don't want to get caught in some stupid trap. Ariel put her hand to her chin and began to consider. Let's see. For the first targets. How about a goblin general? Or is that too easy for you? Every student in the hall was shocked when they heard the first target for the two of. Gray sat in his chair with his arms crossed, carefully evaluating. A goblin general. Why did she choose that exact one? In contrast to him, Saria couldn't help but slam the table in anger. Are you kidding me? Sweat broke out on his forehead. A goblin general isn't the kind of monster a single person can take down on their own. Ariel remained calm, smiling slightly at his reaction. I didn't say you had to kill it immediately. We'll set the time limit for within this year. That's fair enough, isn't it? Saria continued to shout. If someone could take down a disaster-class monster alone after just 1 year of training, people wouldn't be suffering anymore. Choose a more realistic target. After speaking, he paused for a moment and let out a miserable sigh. Immediately after, a smile began to spread across his face. I see. He clenched his fist as if he had realized something. You intentionally chose a monster no one can defeat just to end the wager with no winner, didn't you? I won't agree to that. Ariel stepped closer towards Saria, then one more condition. If it's a draw, you win. He was very surprised to hear that. Huh, Ariel continued. In other words, if that kid doesn't take down a goblin general, I'll automatically be fired, and all special admission students will be expelled. She gave Saria a playful wink. How about it, Saria looked at her and asked fearfully for confirmation. Are you crazy? I have a feeling the outcome of this bet has already been decided. Immediately after, Ariel turned to leave, still smiling. Then I take it you have no further objections. Saria continued to add conditions. Just to be sure, it has to be a fully intact goblin general, not weakened or anything like that. Ariel reached out her hand as a glow slowly appeared. Of course. She flicked her wrist, and a pen appeared along with a blank sheet of paper. I've written all the details into this magic contract. The contract floated before Saria. If you have no issues, then sign it. He thought for a moment, carefully reading the contract. Then he put the pen to the paper and signed it. I'm in. After signing, Saria still wanted to ask more. But hey, do you really believe that kid can win? Ariel didn't care and turned to leave. Who knows? Ariel returned to her spot and calmly sat down in her chair. After she left, the people in the hall began to whisper about the contract. What's wrong with Professor Ariel? Is that old lady using this bet as an excuse to retire? It's also possible she's just been past her prime for a long time. Ariel ignored the mockery around her, still smiling as she looked at the contract in her hand. Gray sat in his chair and let out a helpless sigh, thinking to himself, great, the wager has officially begun. Suddenly he opened his eyes and considered carefully. Wait a minute. Why do I get the feeling she factored in the one I defeated before enrolling when she said, the time limit will be within this whole year? Ariel also noticed Gray staring intently at her. Gray was still thinking it through, so the bet was decided from the very beginning. Ariel put an index finger to her lips, signaling him not to speak the truth. Gray lamented, she's such a dirty player. The teacher at the front of the classroom calmly began the lesson. Now then, we will begin the introductory session on magic. He placed the book on the table and continued. Some of you may be surprised that the lectures are starting on the very first day, but as students of this academy, you must remember not to waste even a single day. Starting with the most basic thing, he said, raising a hand that glowed with a blue light, how to use magic. He then continued to lecture on the use of spells. Within our bodies exists an invisible energy source called ether. By guiding it through the magic circuits in your body, you can. The instructor focused on teaching at the podium while below, the academy students listened intently. Sitting below, Gray thought to himself, I was worried I wouldn't be able to keep up with the class, but it seems okay. I learned this stuff at the training camp already. The problem now is, he thought, his gaze settling on something. Gray looked at the blonde-haired person sitting in the very front row. Out of the dozens of classes I could have chosen, I ended up in the same class as him again. He leaned his cheek on his hand dejectedly. Please, let nobody find out I'm the God-Eye special admission student. Suddenly a voice rang out, breaking his train of thought. Hey, you over there, you look bored. It hasn't even been 5 minutes and you're already looking away. You've got some nerve. Gray was startled and stammered. I'm sorry, Gray thought to himself. He spotted me with just one glance, but I'm sitting all the way in the back row. The professor closed the book in his hand. If you're that confident, why don't you show the whole class a little something? I assume you know how to use basic magic. Gray stood up awkwardly and explained, With all due respect, sir, we're in the swordsmanship track. I thought it was okay if I didn't know magic. He still held the thick book in his hand and reminded him, even if you only use a sword in a real battle, you still need to know basic magic to coordinate with mages. You have to feel and understand what it's like to control ether. Gray didn't know how to respond and froze for a moment. It was exactly like what he had been taught at the training camp. If so, would the spell they were about to learn be the same too? Immediately after, he asked the instructor, "The spell we're about to learn, is it ether bullet, sir?" The instructor had returned to his podium. "Oh, you know it. Can you use it?" Gray replied, "Yes." He let out a silent sigh of relief, feeling like he had just escaped a disaster. Good, that hellish training camp wasn't for nothing. He continued, "This is a good opportunity. Let's turn this into a match. Leon, you can use ether bullet too, right?" Leon stood up and answered his question. "Of course, sir." Leon continued, "In that case, Professor, I was trained in both swordsmanship and magic before enrolling. Wouldn't it be too risky to make him actually duel me?" The instructor remained firm in his decision. "No matter how big the skill gap is, we're only using ether bullet. He won't die, and I'm not going to tell you to hold back." But that gray-haired boy is this year's God-Eye special admission student. Leon was stunned to hear this. What? Upon hearing the instructor's words, everyone in the class turned around at once to look at Gray with equally surprised expression. Gray was also extremely flustered to receive so much attention from the other students. He looked into the professor's calculating eyes. He just blurted it all out. Leon slammed his hand on the desk. "So that's how it is. In that case, I'll have to give him a proper lesson." He turned around with an annoyed look. "I'll show him what kind of place this academy is." He then looked at Gray and growled each word, "Get out on the floor." Gray looked on, completely speechless. The two students stepped up to the front and stood facing each other. The professor stood in the middle and began to explain the rules. "Now then, when I give the signal, fire an ether bullet at your opponent." Gray looked quite guarded, thinking, "I only studied magic at the training camp for a few days. Even if the teacher says I won't die, it doesn't look like I'll come out of this unscathed." After finishing his instructions, the professor shouted, "Begin." Leon started to summon magic and spoke in a challenging tone. "I'll show you the difference in our power." Gray didn't back down either, trying to summon the best magic he possibly could. "I have no choice left. Forget everything else." Immediately after, the two spheres of power from both of them flew toward each other. However, something unexpected happened that neither of them could believe. They both shouted in unison, "What?" That burst of light began to move and was about to charge straight at Leon, forcing him to step back to dodge. Leon recoiled in panic, his eyes wide and his mouth open in a terrified shout as the light approached. Suddenly, a man rushed in to shield him, throwing his arms out to take the blow, his face showing clear determination amidst the violent light. Instantly, the space brightened. Saria sat almost paralyzed, able only to stare at the scene before her. "That was close," he breathed a sigh of relief, gently wiping away the beads of sweat still dotting his face. The source of the light almost shattered, and large cracks began to appear across the blinding patch. Suddenly, a young man jumped down into that blinding stream of light without the slightest hesitation. A powerful gust of wind blew as he passed, making the entire hall recoil in fear and cover their faces. In less than 5 minutes, Saria fell directly onto the floor and screamed in pain. The man rushed over like the wind to check on him. "Leon, are you okay?" Leon's body was trembling as he struggled to look up at the man in front of him. Leon braced himself, tried to wipe the taste of blood from the corner of his mouth, and replied softly, "I'm okay." The man didn't ask further, only nodding and saying, "I see, thank goodness." However, his gaze remained sharp as he looked around with suspicion and high alert. If it weren't for the barrier reducing the impact, he would have lost his life. Perhaps the collision earlier had caused the room to become desolate and stifling, shrouded in a thick layer of dust. Even among the professors, no one can fire an ether bullet that powerful. He tilted his head with an angry expression and called out, "You, what did you just do?" He didn't answer immediately, but only looked down at his palm for a moment, frowning in thought about something. He thought to himself, it was so weak. It's clearly not the same type of spell I used. His pupils immediately contracted. Is the ether bullet I learned in the suppression team different from what they teach at the academy? He clenched his hand, his red eyes burning with irritation. He held out his hand in front of his chest to show respect and politely asked the man before him, "Did I use the wrong spell?" He let out a helpless sigh and replied, "No, that was clearly an ether bullet. But the quality of yours is different. What you just used wasn't normal ether. It was ultra-compressed ether, panther form. It's a powerful form of energy hidden within the orb that emits an intense light." The people in the hall couldn't help but buzz with excitement, and a series of questions were raised. "Ultra-compressed ether? I've never heard of that before." He immediately replied, It's a form of energy that even we, the professors, find very difficult to create. Yet in that moment, you formed it and turned it into magic. No one in this academy can recreate what you just did. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd began to chatter again. That's the first time I've seen an ether bullet that strong. Was the God Eye category created specifically for this? They should have put him in the magic track from the start instead of a special admission. He thought to himself, no way. All the spells the suppression team learned at the training camp were like that. Among them, I was even someone with much less talent. Because of his lack of talent, he had fallen before everyone else in every duel. He asked with a serious face, "Are you joking with me, Professor? Anyone could do it if they practiced correctly." The corner of his mouth suddenly curled up. Gray Lay stood there blankly, still not understanding what he was laughing about. This only made him burst into hearty laughter, to the point where his eyes squinted. Gray Lee nearly froze in place, only daring to stand there dumbfounded, still not understanding what was going on. Suddenly, he leaned in close to Gray's face and proposed, giving him no room to resist, "Why don't you switch to the magic track? I'll guarantee it for you. You clearly have more talent for magic than swordsmanship." He said sheepishly, clenching his fists and looking away, "I have to refuse. I heard I'm not very good at magic." He shouted, "Are you kidding me? You understand the technique of compressing ether so well that you can create super compressed ether at your age. You're a one-of-a-kind genius, even by academy standards, and I can personally vouch for that. I don't know which fool told you that you have no talent, but clearly, they didn't know what they were talking about. Gray, you're sure you don't want to switch to the magic track?" Everyone couldn't help but exclaim. For a professor who almost never compliments anyone to say such things, it's truly astonishing. Regardless, he pointed straight at his face and said in a murderous tone, "It would be a great loss to the world if you didn't study magic. I could even call it a crime against magic itself." Gray Lay could only offer a faint smile in response to his words. He paused, momentarily surprised, and thought to himself, "Wait, what did he just say? Ether, compression technique. I feel like I've heard of that before." Looking back at the old days, humans didn't know about OD, or what is known as life force. Because of that, casting magic was very difficult. One had to continuously compress ether in the body, then try to gather and use whatever parts of the ether happened to be mixed with OD. Bella suddenly spoke up, thinking back, "That's really ridiculous, isn't it?" He continued, "Professor, do you know about OD?" He thought for a long time, then asked back, "OD, what is that?" While he was thinking about what OD was, Gray gradually deduced, "With this reaction, I've confirmed it. The current world still doesn't know about the existence of OD. If that's the case, then what I learned from the suppression squad is knowledge from the future." He widened his eyes in surprise. "I must be careful about who I share this with." His hand immediately clenched with determination, but the man asked again, "So, do you want to switch to the magic track?" He bowed respectfully and replied politely, "I apologize, but I don't love swordsmanship. Even though I am very grateful for the offer, I'm afraid I have to refuse." He sighed helplessly and said, "If that's what you want, then so be it. If you change your mind, come find me anytime." His hand gripped tight with determination. He could only scratch his head and reply lightly, "Thank you very much for the offer." He pointed toward the stands and said, "You can go back to your seat. I won't scold you anymore if you're distracted in class, and it's even fine if you leave because you're bored. This lecture is too basic for you." As soon as the words left his mouth, everyone was surprised. A group of people whispered among themselves, showering Gray Lee with praise. "Amazing. I can't believe Professor Carlos holds him in such high regard." He stood up and watched Gray's retreating back. Suddenly, someone kept tugging at their tie. He stood up and said politely, "Mr. Gray," his voice full of awkwardness mixed with a hint of warmth. He couldn't help but feel a chill, thinking, "What's this? Why am I getting the shivers?" Finally, evening came, and he was summoned. "Come to the office after school today, Ariel." He strode down the empty hallway, holding the letter with a puzzled look. Getting called in so suddenly like this. Could it be because of Professor Carlos? Imagining that stern face, he scratched his head self-reproachfully. "Don't tell me Professor Ariel also intends to convince me to switch track." He stood before the intricately carved wooden door, but still hesitated at the entrance, reading the letter over and over. He knocked politely, and a voice echoed from within, "Gray, right. It's unlocked." He walked in with his head bowed. "Excuse me." He caught a glimpse of something preparing to lunge toward. He immediately drew his sharp sword. He gently thrust the sword straight at the thing, without a moment's hesitation. She was startled, her mouth agape in surprise. His hand remained in the sword-holding stance, thinking, "My body is reacting on its own. What the hell?" He couldn't help but panic when he saw a girl sitting on the floor, trembling, pointing a sword at. His eyes widened. This girl, she sat there, exhaling in relief, full of worry. "I feel like I've seen her somewhere before. She glanced gently at him with a look of fear. From the side came a word of praise. "Oh, not bad at all." Ariel said confidently, "I knew my judgment wasn't wrong." The man with parted hair asked, "Bella, you didn't hold back just now, did you? Ariel told you to save your strength, right?" The bearded man questioned. "Your movements were perfect, but dropping your sword so easily like that is not natural at all." The name was truly familiar. Gray instinctively glanced over. Bella, so it really is Bella Albright. Looking at her now, the present version wasn't much different from the future one, the female maid. Ariel wasn't having it. She looked at them with contempt. "Are you too seriously saying that? If you can't even realize that, then you might as well quit teaching." The man with parted hair was a bit sheepish. "Ah no, we were just joking." Ariel mocked. "Unfortunately, I'm forced to admit it." Gray was still bewildered. "Professor, what are you guys doing?" Ariel happily explained. "We were placing a bet to see if you could block Bella's surprise attack. Thanks to you, I won big." She threw something to Gray, which he quickly caught. Gray was shocked when he opened his hand. "A gold coin. This is a fortune." Finally, the mustached old man conceded. "But it really is as you said." He had been closely watching the match. From the sparring phase just now, it looked like he was intentionally not using his dominant hand. The bearded man diagnosed. "Perhaps it's because of an injury." Gray Lee clutched his arm in pain, realizing they were completely right. "Instead of an obvious muscle injury, I think it's a deeper type of damage." The remaining man agreed. "I agree. A regular injury wouldn't be this serious." Gray couldn't believe they had guessed correctly just by looking. "You can tell all that just by looking." The bearded man replied as if it were obvious. "If we couldn't even tell that much, how could we be professors at this academy?" The man with parted hair added, "Anyway, it seems Professor Ariel knew about this since the entrance exam." Ariel, cold and unwilling to talk to them, said, "If you figured it out, please get lost. He's my student. I'm not handing him over to anyone." Both men turned, preparing to leave. The one with parted hair left a compliment. "We acknowledge he has potential, at least for now." The bearded man walked past, his eyes sharp. "But if that injury doesn't heal, it also means he won't meet the Academy's admission standards. Remember that." Gray's gaze became cautious. Now only Professor Ariel, Bella, and Gray remained in the room. Ariel spoke up, now that the nuisances are gone. She now exuded a mysterious air. "Let's talk about magic." Starting the conversation, Ariel asked about Gray's background. "I heard you used supercompressed ether in Professor Carlos's class." Gray didn't intend to hide it, "So you already know." Ariel recounted. "He came to my office and told me to transfer you to the magic department, but naturally I refused." Ariel pondered for a few seconds. "To me." Then she revealed her other eye. It glowed like starlight. "You are more suited for swordsmanship than magic." Seeing the professor reveal her other eye for the first time, Gray couldn't help but be surprised. Ariel explained in detail. "At the very least, you don't look like someone good at compressing magical power at all. There isn't even a sign of having practiced it before." Perhaps from now on, Gray would be more cautious. He thought to himself, "That eye, she just looked and knew. It's best not to lie." Gray answered honestly, "Exactly as you said." Ariel dug deeper. She was still far too curious about her student. "May I ask what trick you used?" "I promise I won't tell anyone, and I'll even throw in a reward." Ariel looked toward Bella as if there were a secret between the two. "I really need to know that, for the sake of that girl." Gray instinctively answered, but he caught himself just in time. Deep down, Gray Lee breathed a sigh of relief. Because because of Bella. He almost slipped up and called her a maid. Ariel looked at Bella's pained expression and shared directly. "That's right. Although she is a genius in magic theory, her practical ability is not yet the best." Ariel was a bit troubled. She worried. "I don't know why, she just can't use the ether compression technique well. That is the reason she cannot create super-compressed ether." Gray Lee intently observed Bella, recalling the information he knew. "I've also heard that Bella Albright is a late bloomer, so that's the reason." Ariel continued speaking about Gray's power, but hearing from Professor Carlos, "When you use super-compressed ether, it didn't look like you were compressing ether at all. If there truly exists a way to use super-compressed ether without compressing ether, then she wouldn't have to be transferred to Professor Bradley." At the mention of that, Bella's complexion soured. Gray froze. "Professor Bradley. The Professor Bradley you speak of." Gray Lee's face clearly showed horror. He said excitedly, "Is it Professor Varian Bradley?" Ariel replied, "That's right. It seems you know him too." Gray's mind was now in total chaos. "Of course I know him. He's notorious." The memories he still recalled were rows of corpses lying at his feet. He had performed countless experiments on people and killed countless others. Or an entire town burnt to the ground by Bradley's experiments. Furthermore, he caused magical disasters, resulting in dozens of deaths. To Gray, Bradley was like a serial killer. He was the most infamous magical criminal in history. He still hasn't been caught yet. Ariel was worried. If by the end of the year she still cannot create super-compressed ether, she will be transferred to him and operated on. The horror inside Gray Lee surged. He couldn't sit still anymore. Wait, that's not okay at all. Ariel predicted Bella's tragic fate. That's right. Although he excuses it as increasing magical ability, in reality, it's human experimentation. She had also seen bodies that couldn't close their eyes even in death due to their injustice. This hasn't been announced, but there are rumors that because of him, many people have died, while others were left ruined. Finally, after a long silence, Bella spoke up. It's dangerous and terrifying, but if I can't use super-compressed ether, I'll be expelled at the end of the year. Ariel spoke with a resolute voice, filled with hatred for the sick Bradley. Honestly, I'd rather you drop out than let that guy lay a hand on your body. Gray pondered for a long time. The magic I know is knowledge that has never existed in this era. If I reveal it, it could change the entire course of history. Bella was terrified, her body trembling. Gray's deep gaze seemed as if he wanted to curse. The future he was speaking of was a world annihilated by the purger, or myself being useless, or the warriors killed in an instant. Is that the future I desire? His facial muscles relaxed, but why not? If that dark future can be changed, it can only be for the better. Gray set his teacup down with determination. I understand now. I will teach you. From his hand, a dark magical orb suddenly appeared. Outside the arena, everyone was silent, intently watching the board as Gray explained the magic. Gray said honestly, and that is all the knowledge I know about magic. As promised, please don't tell anyone that I taught you this. Ariel said firmly, committing. Of course, we even signed a magic contract. Bella added, breaking the law means death. This matter had been agreed upon by both parties, and Gray Lee felt at ease. So, after hearing what I said, what do you think? Ariel, though a good professor, was stunned by the recent heap of knowledge. Just the part about OD alone already amazed me, but the magical knowledge you shared is even beyond that. Bella, meanwhile, absorbed it very well. She thought, concise and tight. How should I put it? It feels like I just had a magic lesson from 100 years in the future. Bella was very interested in the knowledge Gray brought. She sincerely praised. Just hearing your explanation is enough to advance the history of magic by 100 years. Even though he was very happy for the praise, Gray didn't dare to get complacent. Even though that was a lecture of mine from 10 years in the future, for people of this time, it really does look like it's 100 years ahead. Ariel still had too many doubts. There are many things I can't evaluate right away. Do you think what he said is true? Bella placed full trust in Gray Lee. It's very likely that the theory is correct. There's nothing contradicting current magic theory. And the fastest way to verify it is to test it. That's why we're here. Bella looked at Gray expectantly. If everything you said is true, Gray, then this spell will work. She left the paper behind and stepped forward according to the theory. Bella raised her wand, forming a magic circle. This spell will unleash my full power. Gray was somewhat hesitant. Then he tried to remember. Full power. If I remember correctly, Bella Albright's full power is said to be enough to burn down an entire city. In just the blink of an eye, the magic circle grew massive, covering the entire space. Moreover, she used to be unable to control such an immense amount of magical power. Bella was still stunned. Gray hadn't managed to stop her, yet when his body began to blur, wait. From the arena, an immense amount of magic erupted, as if a volcano were erupting. Blinding light radiated everywhere, and the shockwave of the power made Gray Lee's face distort, looking both pitiful and funny. Wait. Immediately after, a pillar of fire appeared, shooting straight into the sky. Gray Lee hurriedly reached his hand out in front of him to block the incredibly powerful, scorching wind coming from Bella Albright's direction. He squinted, observing the pillar of fire, terrified. Truly, the power is overwhelming. Gray Lee thought back to how the fire had quickly spread everywhere, about to reach him. If she hadn't controlled the magic even a split second earlier, I would surely be dead. But thanks to her, the fire was controlled and reversed away from him. It truly saved his life. On the other side, Bella Albright raised her wand high, happily announcing, I did it. I also tried to control it. The fire burned fiercely but looked very orderly, hovering around a corner of the space. Then it swirled and converged into one spot. A massive, hazy dragon made of red fire soared in the air. Bella Albright smiled happily, looking up at the magic she had created. Man, this is so fun. But suddenly she withdrew the fire, her voice faint and whispering. But the very next second, Bella Albright closed her eyes and fainted, her voice fading into the wind. I'm out of ether. She fell face first to the ground, motionless. This scene scared the life out of Gray Lee. He quickly approached, lifting her head and cried out anxiously, Bella. Ariel, standing behind, calmly reminded him, stay calm. She seriously reassured him. She just fell asleep because she ran out of ether. Let her rest. As she said, Bella Albright's face looked very peaceful as she slept quiet. Gray Lee saw this and smiled in relief. Ariel turned to examine the remaining flame up high, unable to stop herself from exclaiming in surprise, "Still, it's truly amazing. I didn't expect her to be able to create a spell of that scale in such a short time." Suddenly, Bella Albright answered in a low voice, "The talented one isn't me, it's the theory. Now I can easily create super-compressed ether." Gray Lee helplessly thought to himself, "But that's your theory. Can she still answer even when asleep?" Ariel didn't mind her small action. She just sighed in relief and declared, "Now that she's created super-compressed ether, there's no need for surgery anymore. I will tell Bradley myself to cancel the operation." She thought back to the sight of Bella Albright controlling the magic just moments ago and felt a weight lifted, less worried. "I'm truly very glad we avoided that risky operation, but I'm even happier that she didn't lose her ability to control her magical power." But Gray Lee caught the strange point in Ariel's words. He glanced at her, suspiciously asking, "Her ability to control magic?" She seriously confirmed, "That's right." Ariel explained with a cold expression, "Although Bradley's surgery can increase magical power output, it's traded off against control. The exact operation method is still a secret, but I've heard it's a type of surgery that forcibly breaks one's limits." He raised his hand to touch his chin, his inner mind waking up in realization. "So that's how it is. So the female mage in my previous world couldn't control her immense magical power because of that surgery." She smiled in satisfaction and raised her hand to summon a contract paper. "Anyway, thanks to you, Bella has been able to create super-compressed ether, so the conditions in our contract have been fulfilled." Ariel held the paper up in front of her, seriously expressing, "Now it's my turn to fulfill my part. First of all." She looked down at Gray Lee's arm and announced, "Regarding your arm, I want to use my magical power on it." Immediately after, magical blue streams of energy and beautiful butterflies appeared from her hand. Ariel brought her hand close to the back of his hand, applying magic to it. In just a moment, the entire space was submerged in blue light and butterflies, originating from where their hands met. A moment later, Ariel stopped, and the beautiful, strange phenomenon gradually dissipated. She asked casually, "How is it?" Gray Lee tried moving his hand, clenching and opening it. He widened his eyes in disbelief. "I can move it." Gray Lee smiled happily, expressing his appreciation. "Thank you very much, Professor." But then he asked, full of suspicion, "But even magic recovery potions couldn't heal it. How come?" Hearing this, Ariel replied with confident arrogance, "Don't compare my nerve-regenerating magic with those ordinary recovery potions." She crossed her arms and asked seriously, "But can it move like before? Try swinging a sword." He replied without hesitation, "Yes." Gray Light turned and moved a distance away from her. Then he drew his sword and tried to swing it horizontally in front of him. He felt the sensation of the movement was a bit strange, so he skeptically looked at his sword-wielding arm. The next second, Gray Lee nimbly slashed, creating sharp sword strike. He frowned in discomfort and then fell silent for a moment. Gray Lee stopped, looked at his hand, and reported with sorrow, "It feels like my arm isn't as flexible as before." Ariel wasn't very surprised to hear that, just as I thought. She raised her hand to her forehead and explained reluctantly, "I can heal the nerves, but my magic cannot heal wounds in your soul." He looked at her, confused. "My soul?" Ariel glanced at him, seriously confirming, "That's right, you didn't mishear." She placed her hand on her chest and explained, "Although current magical knowledge has yet to prove the existence of the soul, I believe it exists." She raised her hand to cover one of her eyes. After all, when Ariel moved her hand away, a bizarre pattern appeared in her pupil. "I can see it with this eye." She could see inside Gray Lee there was a radiant beam of light, with rays of light slowly gathering around it. "Even now, your soul is slowly recovering. As long as you don't overexert yourself, it will heal on its own over time." He looked at his hand, surprised and in disbelief. "Don't overexert my body." Then he looked up at her and asked, "Does that mean don't train too hard?" Surprisingly, Ariel denied it. "Not at all, you can still train as usual." She rested her chin on her hand, wondering incessantly, "But I'm curious what kind of swordsmanship could cause damage to the soul like that." Hearing this, Gray could only force a smile, unable to answer. Suddenly, she uttered a sentence that left him stunned. "Then again, swordsmanship that uses the soul to swing the sword does exist." Ariel, with a mysterious expression, mentioned a name, Amy White. "You know her, right?" Gray Lee opened his eyes wide in terror. In his mind, the face of the Amy White from his previous life immediately appeared. Why is she mentioning the Sword Saint's name here? At this moment in time, she and I shouldn't know each other. Seeing his strange expression, she asked suspiciously, Did I say something wrong? The way you use your sword looks like you learned it from Amy." Ariel analyzed with some hesitation, but thinking about it, there's a slight difference. The person who taught you swordsmanship seems even better than Amy. She looked at him and asserted confidently, Although in just a few years, Amy will also reach that level. Gray Lee secretly broke into a cold sweat at her perceptiveness. She even knows about that. He vaguely mentioned information about his skills. "Ah, I learned swordsmanship at a dojo in my hometown," while his mind raced, thinking of ways to fool her. "I have to change the subject. If this conversation continues, I'll slip up." He hurriedly switched to another issue. Is it really true that swordsmanship can damage the soul? Just as Gray Lee hoped, Ariel confidently answered the question. Not at all, at least, not with ordinary types of swordsmanship. She stood with her hands on her hips, lecturing with an air of authority, explaining that from the very beginning, there was nothing normal about being able to cut down an ogre general with a single strike, not to mention slicing through the entire horde of ogres and the surrounding trees along with. Her words triggered memories of that moment. His sword strike had sent an entire crowd of goblins flying, saving them from a desperate situation, so it turned out she knew all along. And it was because of that very reason that Ariel had made her joyful wager, stating that, of course, thanks to him, she had practically already won the bet. She then returned to a serious tone, expressing that she had examined the scene and the remaining ruins, and found it truly impressive, noting that not even the most sophisticated cutting magic could have achieved such a feat. Ariel pointed directly at Gray Lee and cautiously inquired about the mysterious power inside him, asking if he had used it. He asked back in surprise if she could see it, to which she replied with a firm and certain tone that of course she could see it. Ariel's eyes radiated a faint glow, lending her words an air of mystery, as she explained that she could see that power leaking through a heavily chained door. Hearing this, Gray Lee stood stunned and speechless with amazement. He thought of the door tightly bound with intricate patterns, repeating the phrase, "the chained door with a heavy heart." He looked at the woman in front of him, his heart now filled with shock and respect, realizing there was no way she could have guessed that she truly did see it. Ariel, ignoring his mood, continued to reveal another piece of news, admitting that she had actually seen a similar source of power before, though she didn't think they were identical, just that they felt the same. Gray Lee inquired curiously about the similar power, wondering if there was someone else who possessed a power like his. She confirmed solemnly that there was, though she wasn't sure if they were even human. Ariel then uttered a name that made his eyes widen in terror. The Purges, that's what they were called. Seeing his expression, she pointed out with certainty that he must have heard of them before. The image of those figures, who seemed human yet were not, flashed through Gray Lee's mind as his inner self questioned with intense pressure why that name had to appear at this specific time. Ariel fully confirmed this, nodding that he had indeed heard of it, and admitted she honestly didn't think it was so widely known, while nearby, a completely oblivious Bella Albright remained in a peaceful sleep. Then she recalled the knowledge on the board from earlier and guessed to herself that, then again, it wasn't too surprising he knew about that kind of forward-looking magic theory. Gray Lee could only scratch his head sheepishly, not daring to take credit, wondering if that really was knowledge from the future, even though no one had discovered that part yet. Ariel crossed her arms and seriously inquired how much he actually knew about the purge. He dropped his hands, not daring to look her in the eye, and answered generally that he only knew it was an extremely dangerous threat to humanity. Recalling the tragic future, he reported with gravity that they had to prevent him from appearing before it was too late, and if that wasn't possible, he had to be destroyed at all costs. Ariel rested her chin on her hand and replied pensively that while it might be a bit extreme, she agreed he was indeed dangerous, yet Balian Bradley seemed determined to continue his experiment regardless. Gray Lee looked at her in confusion and asked how Balian was involved in this matter. This time it was Ariel's turn to be suspicious, asking if he was really even asking that. Immediately after, she calmly revealed the shocking news that the Purger was exactly the entity he was trying to summon. His eyes widened in horror as his heart refused to believe it, repeating that the Purger was created by humans, something he had never heard anyone say before. Then he held his chin, thinking of something suspicious regarding the Academy in the previous timeline. Gray Lee remembered the timely actions of flying to the exact spot where the Purger appeared, which made him even more suspicious, as if they knew exactly where the Purger would show up. As he reasoned through everything, his eyes widened in sheer terror. Gray Lee hurriedly turned around, his inner self finding it hard to believe, thinking, "Don't tell me." He looked at the tall, sophisticated building in front of him, a sense of shock gradually overwhelming his heart, as he wondered if the Academy had been involved in the summoning from the very beginning. He immediately turned to Ariel with a tense demand that the experiment had to be stopped immediately, and she solemnly agreed. Ariel crossed her arms and explained helplessly that the problem was the head of the experiment was a professor just like her, so she had no right to close his research lab or forbid his experiments, even though she had pushed her superiors to cancel them and they had refused. Gray Lee asked strictly who exactly those superiors were. Unfortunately, she shook her head and refused to answer, apologizing and explaining that she didn't have the authority to disclose that, and the issue remained that without an order from above, no one could force the experiment to stop. He closed his eyes, feeling completely helpless, wondering how there wasn't even a name for the person in charge, and realizing the Academy's leadership was more troublesome than he had imagined. Suddenly, a good idea occurred to Gray Lee, and he snapped his eyes open in thought, wondering if things would be different if the man were a criminal. According to what he knew, in the future, that man had participated in human experimentation. In the previous world, Balian's illegal experiments had killed tens of thousands of people, and he even knew exactly where the experiments were being conducted. Gray Lee immediately looked at Ariel and frankly expressed his thoughts, stating he knew where the man performed those illegal experiments and suggesting they catch him right at the scene. But before he could finish, she cut him off, apologizing and explaining that wouldn't work either. When he asked why in confusion, she calmly explained that entering a professor's research facility within the academy without a permit was a serious crime. Ariel warned with a cold expression that without concrete evidence, they would be the ones imprisoned, asking if he was saying he actually had proof of the man's crimes right now. Gray Lee glanced away uneasily, not knowing how to answer, so she ended the topic by saying that if not, the matter would have to be set aside for now. He clenched his fists unwillingly, realizing that even though she knew it was dangerous, she was also powerless, and he replied with a fairly frustrated tone that he understood. Sensing his mood, Ariel leaned her chin on her hand and brought up another matter, saying that more importantly, they should talk about his power and asking if he wanted to learn how to control it. These words struck right at the heart of Gray Lee's desires, and he immediately forgot the previous topic to look at her in amazement. He then quickly asked if that was possible, to which she smiled proudly, and replied that there was a professor at the academy who was very skilled at handling unknown abilities. Ariel glanced at him and slowly uttered the professor's name, Heathcote Longfellow. Gray Lee's eyes widened in disbelief. Heathcote Longfellow was the very person who had trained the SWORDSMAN. She gave him a serious instruction, saying she thought he would find it interesting and that she would arrange for him to begin private training with the man starting tomorrow. He replied happily with a thank you, feeling incredibly lucky, as the whole reason he came to the academy was to master this power. Gray Lee felt extremely joyful and satisfied, not expecting to find a lead so quickly, as the afternoon sunlight shining on the training facility building seemed like a sign of a good beginning for his new life. The next day, a man ran in a rush at a speed, as fast as a flash of lightning through the forest. Behind him, Gray Lee was exhausted, and his face was covered in sweat, his mind distracted by the thought that he was receiving private lessons from Heathcote Longfellow. But he struggled to keep up with Heathcote Longfellow, his heart screaming in frustration, wondering why they had to run like this. The current location of the two was in the forest next to the teaching hall, right here. While running, the man suddenly turned his head and shouted sternly that he could feel Gray's spirit was distracted, telling him that if he still had room for wandering thoughts, then he should speed up and run until his body was absolutely depleted. Heathcote Longfellow maintained his lead while seriously instructing that Gray should listen carefully. Only when every drop of physical life force is burned away does the power of the soul awaken, and as long as a shred of physical stamina remains, he wouldn't let Gray touch a sword. Gray Lee hurriedly replied, "Yes, master." He tried to convince himself while running that if it was Heathcote's training, there must be a purpose, yet the matter of Varian Bradley kept bothering him, making him feel uneasy that while he was running in circles here, Balian was still conducting experiments to summon the purge. Before he could think further, Heathcote Longfellow suddenly increased his speed ahead. Gray Lee gritted his teeth and tried to catch up, and because of this, the thoughts in his head became hesitant and uncertain about whether he should be doing this right now. One day, Gray Lee returned to the room to meet Ariel. She sat behind the desk and inquired with interest how the week of training with Heathcote had gone. He scratched his head and hesitantly recounted that it was actually mostly running, and they only did a few sword drills at the very end, though he did feel he had become a bit stronger. Hearing this, she burst out laughing, remarking that it sounded exactly like the man. Suddenly, someone entered through the door, saying, "Excuse me." The person handed a letter to Ariel, informing Professor Ariel that there was a letter for her. She reached out to take it with a thank you. Ariel then opened it to read immediately. Abruptly, her eyes widened in disbelief. Seeing this, Gray Lee asked with concern what was wrong. He took the letter and held it up to read, and upon seeing the information, he too was terrified. It was. The paper read, "Dear Professor Ariel, we received a report that Bella Albright successfully created ultra-compressed ether, meaning she actually possesses a power similar to it. However, after examination, it is clear she hasn't truly compressed it yet. Therefore, her new ability cannot be recognized as ultra-compressed ether. The contract remains in effect, and the operation will proceed as planned. Balian Brad. Gray Lee could not contain his anger and cursed it out loud, saying it was driving him crazy. Ariel reported with a heavy heart that it seemed Bradley was still determined to force her into surgery, even though she might not need it now. He looked at her and asked anxiously if she couldn't refuse, but Ariel was also helpless, nodding the contract was too tight. Ariel clenched her fingers and uttered another suggestion one word at a time. Unless Bradley himself canceled it, Bella could only choose between being expelled or undergoing the surgery. Gray Lee whispered in disbelief, "No." Suddenly Ariel slammed her hand on the desk and called out, "Gray, I need your help." She looked at him and made a solemn request, asking him to show her where Bradley's lab was, stating that if his criminal behavior were exposed, the contract would be void. Gray Lee looked back in astonished silence, and then he couldn't suppress a smile. Gray Lee let out a breath and didn't forget to mock Ariel back, asking if she hadn't said it would be dangerous without evidence. Naturally, Ariel remembered her previous words. She replied nonchalantly that they would find the evidence, stating she was placing her trust in him. Her gaze was sharp as she looked intently at him, saying that no, perhaps she had believed him from the very start because her eyes told her so. Ariel stated firmly her belief that he had been telling the truth this whole time. She calmly expressed that it just took her some time to admit it, and Gray Lee could only look at her and listen in silence. Ariel stepped up beside him and made a demand, "Lead the way, Gray." Then she solemnly declared, with a serious expression, that they would expose his crimes together. Following that, the main character's face also became quite serious as he said, "His lab is located in the mountain range near the village of Toril." Upon hearing the answer, Professor Ariel's gaze became somewhat pensive as she continued, "At Mount Toril. I remember very clearly that he has an academy-approved lab there." The information from the teacher's mouth suddenly made Gray feel even more shocked. Was he really conducting illegal experiments right inside an approved lab? Responding to those words, the red-haired woman turned sharply. What place could be more convenient for illegal work? Even if he stays there for a long time, no one would suspect a thing. And most importantly, no other professor would interfere with someone else's lab. However, as long as we find evidence of his crimes, no one will question us breaking into the lab. At the same time, a knock suddenly sounded at the door, followed by a voice. "It's me, Bella." Seeing this, Ariel called her in. "Come in." Stepping into the room, Bella also looked worried as she took out a letter and said heavily, "Professor, I received this letter." Without letting her finish her sentence, Ariel gently snatched the letter from the blue-haired girl's hand and reassured her. "Don't worry, I'll handle this." Her serious gaze left Bella somewhat confused as she asked back, "Do you mean you're intentionally going up against Varian for my sake, Professor, just by yourself?" In response to that question, the female professor let out a very confident smile. "I'm enough on my own." Left with no choice, number 3 had to turn her worried gaze toward the main character. As if understanding the signal, Gray immediately said, "Please wait a moment, I'm going too." Beside him, the blue-haired girl didn't want to be left behind and chimed in, "Me too. After all, this is my business." Switching to the female professor's perspective, seeing her 2 students under her wing so eager, she sighed with her hand to her face and advised, "Wait, he's an academy professor, not to mention he's a madman who has repeatedly conducted dangerous human experiments. If he catches either of you, there's no telling what he'll do. I can't let you 2 risk going there." As for Gray, he naturally understood this, yet he took a step forward and said, "That's exactly why going alone is even more dangerous. If I use the power that knocked down the general again, I can definitely help you to some extent. Besides, if you disappear, as a special admission student, I'll be expelled. Please let us decide our own fate." They spoke while looking forward with faces full of determination. Then, after a brief standoff of glares, Professor Ariel gave in and accepted them coming along. "It seems that even if I stop you, you 2 will come anyway." "Fine then, but you must promise me one condition. No matter what happens, you must put your own safety first, understood?" When she said this, her eyes were full of a seriousness that allowed for no argument, and both of them understood and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." And so, time passed quickly as the 2 of them dragged each other to the Bradley lab. Looking at the massive building in front of her, number 3 was the first to speak. "Is he really conducting illegal experiments here?" Hearing that, the professor nodded in response. "That's right. Now we'll look for evidence, won't we?" Having said that, she turned her questioning gaze toward Gray, and Gray didn't keep her waiting, answering immediately, "Yes, this is definitely the place." Turning to Bella's perspective, even though it had come to this, she still had some worry in her heart. "If you say so, then I believe you, but can we collect evidence without getting into trouble?" Just as the question was finished, Professor Ariel suddenly let out a bright laugh. Varian is currently at a meeting of the Law Council, so he's not here. There's a high chance the main door is trapped, so we have to break through the side wall to get in. The red-haired woman's plan made Bella feel a bit hesitant as she whispered, "Is that really okay?" Ariel answered with a face full of confidence. "Breaking into an approved lab is already a crime anyway, so it doesn't matter. If you change your minds, you two can head back." Hearing those words, Bella's hand instinctively tightened around her staff, and she answered with a firm voice, "I'm going." "But are you really sure? You're doing all this just for someone like me?" Before she could even finish her sentence, Gray turned to counter her. "You're wrong. Stopping his experiment is for the sake of the whole world. If not, countless people will die. No, the whole world will be sacrificed by him." Gray's spirited face was full of tension, which left Bella stunned as she instinctively asked, "What do you mean?" To be more certain, Professor Ariel also spoke up. "What Gray said might be a bit much, but I agree he must be stopped. So don't worry too much. We aren't risking our lives just for you, Bella. Now let's go." Having said that, all three of them rushed forward like the wind. While moving, the red-haired woman used her magic, creating streaks of red light that shot directly at the concrete wall in front of them, causing quite a large explosion. Dust and smoke flew everywhere. Looking at the large hole in the wall in front of him, Gray let out an uneasy smile, thinking to himself, "Haha, that's way too flashy." Putting that aside, the three of them quickly entered the lab through the hole in the wall. Just looking at the scene inside, Gray's face darkened. "What is this?" he cried out. At this moment, in front of the three of them were countless cells, still stained with streaks of black blood. Inside some of the cells, a few people still remained, their whole bodies covered in blood from the experiment. At this point, the unauthorized group didn't even need to bother searching anymore. Ariel remarked, "It seems we don't even need to look for evidence." Bella anxiously scanned all four directions and said, "There are too many." The professor nodded in agreement. "With just a glance, I've seen 14 types of forbidden arts. That's already a serious crime, not to mention the illegal human experimentation is just as grave." As she spoke, suddenly, all three of their gazes were drawn to something. Not far away, a strange magic circle caught their attention. "What is that? It looks like some kind of altar." "What should we do? The original plan was to just take the evidence and leave, but should we rescue the people being held here?" The mage Bella asked anxiously. However, her suggestion was rejected by the main character. "We can't stay here too long. If we're delayed, then Varian might." Before he could finish his sentence, a sudden, astonished, "What are you doing?" rang out from behind them, catching Gray's attention. From within the shadows, a black silhouette began to step forward and spoke. "Were you calling for me?" Turning to Ariel's perspective, she seemed to know exactly who had arrived. So she asked lazily, "How was your meeting, Varian?" Hearing the name just called out was Varian, our protagonist hurriedly drew his sword and stood in a fighting stance, struggling internally as to why he was here. Ignoring the boy's thoughts, Varian on the opposite side explained, "I sent a body double there. I have important experiments to do here. I just acquired some fresh ingredients. I have to make the most of them while they're still fresh. However, I'll have to change my plans." He adjusted his glasses as he spoke, radiating a terrifying pressure throughout his body, which caused the expressions of all three, including Gray, to change in an instant. Professor Varian's explanatory voice continued, "Regardless, I want ingredients that possess magic potential far beyond that of ordinary people. I don't know how you heard about me, but you definitely haven't told anyone that you were coming here, right? If you all suddenly vanished, no one would suspect me." Saying this, he broke into a sly grin, as if he had already guaranteed victory over the three people across from him. Professor Ariel, after hearing him speak like that, questioned, "Ingredients? Don't tell me you intend to use us as lab rats." Just as she predicted, Professor Varian had no intention of denying it. He calmly replied, "Calm down. Your sacrifices will push the boundaries of magic. Therefore, I can't let you leave alive. I will use you as the finest ingredients." Then he broke into another sly grin. However, before he could utter another word, a fireball carrying scorching heat was fired straight at him from the opposite side, causing his expression to darken slightly. Next, a horrific explosion appeared within the gloomy corridor, and the person who had just cast that magic spell was none other than the mage Bella. Looking at her expression, it seemed she had been wanting to take revenge on Professor Varian for a long time. Unfortunately, the attack didn't seem to have much effect. After waiting for the dust to settle, the expressions of both Ariel and Bella flickered with surprise as they looked ahead. In that direction, Professor Varian was still calmly dusting himself off as if nothing had happened, because he had managed to activate a magic barrier to protect himself just in time. He even didn't forget to offer praise. "Wonderful, truly wonderful." Ariel's divine eyes were still incredibly sharp. thinking of a special student like you possessing such unique talent. Perhaps I should start observing those recruited by the divine eye more closely. Saying this, he paused for a beat before mocking Bella. I can't say I'm not impressed by that little bit of magic, but is an academy student trying to assassinate a professor. Replying to this, Bella also released a regretful remark. Better than being killed back, though I missed that chance. Returning to Professor Ariel's perspective, she didn't want her two students to fall into danger, so she immediately suggested, we should retreat right now. We have enough evidence. Hearing her say that, the blue-haired girl nodded in agreement. The academy can handle the rest. However, the villain Varian naturally wouldn't let them retreat so easily. At this moment, his cold voice rang out. Do you think you can just leave here safe? Saying that, he unleashed his magic, firing a purplish-black energy source straight at Bella's position with lightning speed. Fortunately, at the most dangerous moment, Professor Ariel lunged forward, using her shield magic to intercept the attack. Behind, Bella saw this and said anxiously, Professor. On this side, the villain Varian saw his attack blocked, but he remained smugly boastful. It's meaningless. This is one of my research results, the gluttonous flame. It will burn the enemy's defensive magic and turn it into fuel. Theoretically, it cannot be blocked. The only downside is that it costs materials to create. Just as the villainous professor had said, the yellow shield created by Ariel didn't last long before countless cracks appeared, and finally, it shattered into many pieces. Left with no other choice, Ariel was forced to use energy from her divine eyes, creating a blue shield right behind the yellow one, just in time to intercept Varian's attack as the yellow shield crumbled. However, the second defensive layer didn't last long either, and cracks began to spread in all directions. Utilizing this short window, the professor hurriedly issued an order. Bella, take the magic memory bag in gray and get out of here now. Take it to Heathcote. When he sees it, he will know what to do. As she spoke, she gently moved a cube and placed it in Bella's palm. But for Bella, how could she let her teacher be left behind in this place? Immediately, she slammed her staff hard onto the ground and created a hemispherical barrier that covered everyone. This action made the female professor extremely worried. She yelled, "What are you doing? Run away now." Responding to the words, Bella also said in a firm tone, "Professor, your shield is breaking. Let me help." Hearing the third student say that, the red-haired woman became even more frustrated and shouted, "Didn't we promise each other before coming here? If something goes wrong, you must prioritize your own survival. Varian's magic clearly isn't natural. Defensive magic can't block it at all. I will buy some time so." Before the beautiful female professor could finish her sentence, the magic shield she had created shattered into many pieces, causing her expression to become worried. However, for some reason, Bella remained calm and said, "It's fine." Immediately after, Varian's attack collided with the barrier created by Bella, causing a deafening explosion to echo in the air. But the villainous professor's attack couldn't advance even an inch. Bella's explanatory voice started to ring out. This magic isn't that strong. It just needs a slightly different type of defensive magic. Opposite them, Varian saw his attack having no effect and began to panic, then yelled loudly, "Impossible. Only we know the counter-magic theory for the gluttonous flame. How did you know?" Opposite him, Bella enlightened him with a confident tone. "Recently, someone taught me a new theory. With it, this magic is really easy." Hearing this part, Varian almost completely lost his mind. He roared like a rabid dog. Who is it? Name the traitor. Give up and I'll give you a painless death." Bella replied with a slightly teasing tone. "You want to know who taught me? That's a secret, but he's a student from the swordsman department." Opposite, the veins on Varian's face popped out. It seemed he was completely enraged. He roared, "So it seems you won't give me a serious answer, huh? Fine, then prepare to be burned alive." As he spoke, he took a pink crystal from somewhere and crushed it directly in his palm. Next, as if augmented by the crystal, he used his magic, creating countless ghastly skulls flying forward. These skulls began to intertwine with each other, finally forming the shape of a fierce beast's head, biting down toward the group, engulfing them within that magic. Behind them, Gray saw this and broke into a cold sweat as he asked, "Bella, are you still okay?" Bella replied, "I'm fine, the shield can still defend." However, at this point, her voice hesitated, and just by glancing briefly, Varian guessed the reason and said bluntly, "But your mana reserves won't last long, right? At your current reserves, you can hold out for a minute at most." Returning to Bella, she also hurriedly said to her professor, "Professor, attack him quickly. I'll handle the defense." Hearing this, the professor nodded in understanding. "All right." Speaking, she began to activate her divine eyes, silently observing the front. Very quickly, she discovered a weak point in Varian's attack magic. The flame is thin right there. I can move mana outside the barrier. Thinking, she acted. Without a moment's hesitation, The red-haired girl reached her hand forward and quickly focused her magic, creating a bolt of lightning fired straight at Varian. However, for some reason, before the attack could even reach its target, it dissipated along its path. Seeing this, Professor Varian released a scornful remark, trying to counterattack. You can't even get close to me. Ariel's expression became troubled, unsure what to do next. At the same time, Gray was also quickly calculating solutions in his head. If I remember correctly, Professor Ariel's attack magic is one of the weakest among the professors, and given the properties of this flame, it must absorb her magic. Not letting our protagonist think for long, Bella's weak voice rang out. What should we do now? My energy is running out. Looking at her friend's constantly trembling body, Ariel also said bitterly, that's why I said you should have run away right then. Gray stepped forward, reassuring her, leave it to me. This statement seemed to open up a glimmer of hope for the entire group. Bella hurriedly asked, Gray, do you have a plan? Your sword can't reach him from here. Gray replied softly, it'll be fine. I'll definitely be able to do it. To Ariel, she immediately guessed what Gray intended to do, so she reminded him, are you sure about this? Using that power again might kill you. Even if you survive, the arm you use might never recover. Hearing this, the smile on the protagonist's face involuntarily appeared. Then he said, dying alone is better than all three of us dying. Don't you think so? Returning to Varian's perspective, at this moment, he suddenly saw a blinding light emanating from within his own magic. In his view, somehow, Gray had burst out from outside the flame. Even before he could realize it, his setup along with the flames had been sliced in two by Gray. The boy's gaze was calm, as if he had just sliced a piece of butter. Immediately after Gray's slash, the expression of the mage Bella also became stunned. Not only her, even Professor Ariel couldn't hide her astonishment. Looking at Varian's severed body, she was amazed and said, this is the first time I've seen this with my own eyes, but this is overwhelming. And then, not letting them be shocked any longer, the entire prison began to rumble and shake. From above, cracks began to spread in all directions, and debris rained down endlessly. The ceiling was collapsing, someone screamed. However, even this minor tremor wasn't enough to stump our professor. Immediately, she stepped forward, activating her magic to stop the collapse. At that moment, from the soles of her feet, a pink magic ripple spread out in all directions. Next, countless rays of light shot through all the debris, holding them fixed in midair. Then Ariel observed for a moment and said, my goodness, this is far beyond my expectation. Then she turned to look at the protagonist and asked anxiously, but is your body all right? On this side, our protagonist also threw his sword aside. He looked at his constantly trembling hand and said, my hand hurts a bit, and it's a little numb too, but I can still move it. Gray hurriedly picked up his sword. While the red-haired professor, seeing her student was still okay, nodded in satisfaction. It seems your training is paying off. Gray sheathed his sword and admitted, it seems so. Although that's what he said, the protagonist silently reminded himself in his head, if the person using it was the version of me from my days in the village, I would have passed out for days. When I woke up, I probably wouldn't have been able to move my arm at all. But now, it only hurts a little. This a huge improvement. It seems those days of training were truly worth it. Knowing this, Gray clenched his hand again. Meanwhile, Professor Ariel watched silently without saying anything. A few seconds later, she approached and continued, thanks to you, we survived, but I apologize for forcing you to use that power. Responding, Gray shook his head. Please don't worry about it. I was the one who insisted on stopping Varian in the first place. Before he could say anything else, the beautiful professor gave him some advice. But if you can, try not to use that power for a while. Otherwise, the damage might never recover. When saying this, her face was full of worry. Meanwhile, Gray couldn't hide his own confusion. He bit his lip and nodded, I understand. Regarding Bella the mage, hearing the two discuss like that, she curiously asked, excuse me, was that magic just now? But I couldn't sense a bit of ether. Actually, trying to explain that power as magic was impossible. For Professor Ariel, she naturally couldn't let her student dig too deep into this, so she immediately interrupted. I'm sorry, but I hope you don't pry further into this, and don't tell anyone what you saw today. With the professor's serious expression, the mage was a bit flustered and asked, why? Ariel didn't explain much. Instead, she gave an ultimatum to her student. If you can't promise me that, then I am forced to erase your memories. As she said this, she had already started using her magic. This made the mage anxious, and she hurriedly agreed. I understand, let's form a magic contract. That's right, Ariel nodded in reply, simultaneously summoning a magic contract hovering in the air. Just like that, very quickly, they both signed the contract. After finishing everything, Gray spoke up. What now? I'm also worried about the experiments, but first, I think we should help these people. It looks like they were only put to sleep by magic, he said, while observing those imprisoned inside the prison. To this suggestion, Professor Ariel didn't object, but added, "This place isn't safe anymore. We should still take them to the Academy's medical ward to ensure their safety." Saying this, she snapped her fingers, causing the entire detention area to be filled with pale yellow light. Each person's body was covered in an aura. After finishing, the professor explained her action. "I've placed a barrier to prevent them from being harmed from the outside. Done. Let's continue to investigate deeper inside. Looking closely, this place is truly insane. Illegal experiments are being conducted everywhere. I see almost all of them using human cells as magical catalysts, or to enhance human magical ability. I don't see any signals related to the purger. Perhaps it's at another facility." The professor gave her speculation, while the protagonist remained somewhat confused in his mind. Really, this is where the incident that killed so many people in my previous life occurred. Could creating a regular magical catalyst really cause such a huge catastrophe? At this point, a terrifying thought suddenly flashed through Gray's mind. Wait, the thing that killed everyone in my previous life was miasma leaking from underground. Thinking of this, the protagonist suddenly stopped, acting strangely. The professor in front, witnessing this, turned back to ask, "What's wrong?" Gray speculated that there might be something underground, so he expressed his speculation. Could it be underground? It's possible there's some secret passage. Hearing this, the red-haired woman observed the surroundings for a minute, then whispered, "I don't see any mysterious passages." However, just a second later, she seemed to realize something, and hurriedly ran forward. Relying on her divine eyes, she began to spot traces of magic on the ground, so she stated her findings. "Although very faint, I can feel traces of short-distance teleportation magic here." Gray asked, could it be a space only accessible by teleportation magic? Ariel shook her head, continuing to explain. "Based on the traces, the teleportation distance is about 300 meters below. There is definitely something there." Hearing this, Gray hurriedly stepped forward and asked, 300 meters underground. Can we go there?" Responding to this, the professor didn't disappoint him. "I can use a teleportation gate." "Let's give it a try," she said, snapping her fingers, creating a magic circle on the ground, and adding, "If there's nothing there, the gate will just lead to rock." Just like that, the teleportation gate slowly opened. Consequently, when the whole group stepped inside, they couldn't repress their astonishment, because at this moment, the scene before them was countless cubicle buildings built close to one another. Looking at the number of structures, Ariel exclaimed in surprise, "I didn't expect such a vast space underneath." On another side, Bella sensed something through her innate talent. She pointed ahead and said, "I feel a massive source of ether radiating everywhere, especially from that direction." Everyone turned their eyes toward the direction she pointed. There stood a building that looked somewhat different from the rest. The beautiful Professor Ariel continued using her divine eyes to observe and quickly noticed something strange. "It's not just ether. There's an energy source completely different from magic leaking out of that place, and it's stronger than anything I've ever seen." Hearing this, our protagonist realized something as well. Before he could even finish his sentence, the red-haired woman nodded. "That's right. That is the power of the purger." Without hesitating for a single moment, the three of them rushed straight toward the mysterious building where that powerful energy was emanating. Upon entering, the group witnessed several purple crystal pillars, along with a black door bearing a six-winged symbol at the top. To prevent her two students from running into danger, Professor Ariel stepped forward. "Let's see, the energy source is definitely coming from here. But right now, there's no sign of the purger." As she spoke, she tapped lightly on the door to check. From behind, the mage Bella quickly asked, "Are you sure we should be touching that thing?" In contrast to Bella's tension, Ariel calmly replied, "Just relax. This door doesn't hold any power. It's only placed here as a symbol for the ritual. You know that, right?" As she spoke, she went behind the door and opened it to demonstrate. "This door is perfectly safe." Then she scanned the room again and added, "The power isn't inside the door, it's in the magic circle surrounding it." As she said this, the red-haired woman directed her gaze towards several giant glass tubes containing a pink liquid. Then, whether they accidentally bumped into something or not, all those glass columns suddenly began to erupt with a violent surge of power. Terrifying Gray, he hurriedly shouted, "What is this? It's not actually summoning the purger, is it?" Standing beside him, Bella's face also contorted under the pressure. "This magic flow is too dangerous. We have to stop it right now." She gave her assessment. However, Ariel remained as nonchalant as if nothing were happening. "Don't rush in. By my estimate, this system isn't enough to actually summon the purger." Next, before everyone's astonished eyes, space suddenly began to crack in front of the black door, eventually revealing a pitch-black void behind it. Gray and Bella were so terrified witnessing this that they felt their hearts might drop. "Space is being torn apart," they shouted in unison. At the same time, the entire magic circle on the ground, reached its peak level of energy emission. However, after that, Gray and Bella looked somewhat confused. Because from their perspective, even though the magic circle released a massive aura, nothing else happened. To explain this, Professor Ariel enlightened them. These devices aren't meant to summon the purger. They only pierce a small rift connecting to where it exists, and then they siphon the power leaking out from there. The energy core used to crystallize that power is very likely human lives. It looks like about 10 souls have been used, but in the process of creating the mold, even more may have been sacrificed. Most likely, the people captured upstairs were the raw materials for it, she quickly remarked. But this left the mage Bella feeling utterly confused. Why would they go to such lengths just to collect energy? What do they plan to do with it? Answering this, Ariel shrugged and said, "Don't you see? That engraved flame Varian used during the fight. The crystal that amplified those flames is exactly what will be produced when this process is complete. Actually, that catalyst isn't just limited to the fire attribute. If they mass produce it, who knows what they'll do with that kind of power." As she spoke, she observed a diamond-shaped object suspended in midair. Elsewhere, the spatial rift that had been created quickly closed up. On this side, Gray saw this and spoke up. "Look, the cracks are disappearing, so Varian never intended to summon the purger at all." In response to his question, the professor sat down to inspect the containers and said, "I'm not sure if he didn't want to or simply couldn't, but it seems these spatial opening magic tools have been pushed to their absolute limit. This is likely all they are capable of." Meanwhile, Bella took the opportunity to observe the surroundings and quickly realized the value of the equipment installed there. "I think this set of equipment is incredibly precious. I've never seen a spatial teleportation spell so precise and powerful." Her opinion was met with total agreement from Professor Ariel. "Exactly. Like you said, manufacturing a set of equipment like this would cost an entire nation's budget, and there are 8 sets here. Only one organization comes to my mind." Hearing this, Bella blurted out a guess. "Is it the Discar Empire?" The red-haired professor shook her head. "No, it's not them. They might be the largest nation in the world, but their magic research isn't advanced enough to create this." The professor's answer made Bella even more curious. "Then who is it?" she asked again. Ariel didn't answer immediately, but said slowly, "It would have to be an organization whose research capabilities far exceed the Empire." Before she could finish, Gray suddenly cut in. "It's the World Union Academy, isn't it?" Hearing this, Bella turned to Gray with a look of confusion, while the female professor immediately agreed. "Precisely. No other research institute could handle a scale and budget like this." After those words, the room suddenly fell silent. A few seconds later, Bella finally spoke. "So you mean the Academy is behind this, but the World Union Academy is supposed to be the place that protects humanity from threats?" Facing her student's naive thought, the professor only shook her head slightly. "It's understandable you don't want to believe it, but no other organization could have pulled this off." On this side, our protagonist asked anxiously, "But that doesn't mean the entire academy is our enemy, does it? Most of them are still people of justice." He silently recalled the events of his past life to reassure himself. At least, before the regression happened, the academy's volunteer forces were the ones on the front lines, even surpassing the punishment team. They fought to protect civilians until the very end. After witnessing that future, I can't believe the academy is the enemy of humanity. Fortunately, not letting Gray down, the professor didn't dispute that. "Just as you said, the majority in the academy must still be fighting for humanity and wouldn't allow experiments that sacrifice lives like this. However, the academy has countless researchers and facilities. Very few people actually see the big picture, and whoever is backing Varian definitely has massive support. With Varian's authority alone, he could never have arranged this." Hearing the professor's explanation, Bella began to realize just how serious things were. She asked, "So that means we can't completely trust the academy either?" Ariel calmly stated a bitter truth. "I've observed the academy from the inside for decades. It's not an organization you can trust blindly. That much is certain. Most of the people inside believe they are doing good for humanity. Even those behind this experiment have likely convinced themselves they are acting for the greater good. The truth is buried deep in the shadows." Turning back to Gray, he didn't want to waste more time and asked directly, "Do you have a way to track down the mastermind?" In response, Ariel immediately used her divine eyes to search for traces and said, "Let's see, there are no communication devices in this facility, and even the magic signatures of the manufacturer have been wiped clean from the equipment. The concealment was done so thoroughly that finding a trail will be extremely difficult." As she spoke, she glanced to one side. Immediately after, a massive explosion suddenly occurred behind Ariel. Explosions began happening everywhere, as if the secret research facility was set to self-destruct. This terrified the protagonist. Despite the perilous situation, Ariel watched with amusement. It seems they even installed a trace erasure mechanism, but they didn't self-destruct immediately upon Varian's death. Could they have been waiting for an intruder before blowing the place up? Not letting her professor speculate any further, Bella urged her, "This isn't the time for theories. We have to get out of here right now." Seeing her student's panicked state, Ariel just chuckled softly. "Calm down, that's just explosive magic. Professors of the World Union Academy aren't so fragile as to be killed by something like that." Ariel spoke with complete confidence. Ariel activated a magic circle to protect them from the room's destruction. She warned the two, "Don't step out of the magic circle." The energy pillars were still glowing bright. The room was severely shattered. Rocks began to plummet from the ceiling. Outside, the area was desolate and silent. Suddenly, the group was brought outside by Ariel's teleportation spell. She took a quick head count and said, "It looks like all the captives have been secured safely." Bella breathed a sigh of relief. "I thought we were goners for sure this time," while Gray added worriedly, "Wasn't that way too dangerous?" Professor Ariel replied calmly, "Because the cargo was heavier than I anticipated, the teleportation was delayed a bit, but it was worth it because we secured these." What she was referring to were those energy pillars. Once they brought these back to the academy, they wouldn't be able to ignore them anymore. A clear full moon shone brightly across the night sky. By the next morning, back at the World's Union Academy, in the office of the academy's principal, he announced, "The survivors are being treated at the academy's medical facility." Oradrom praised Gray's group. "We truly must thank you all for stopping Varian's illegal experiments." He picked up a report to examine it. "Now then, regarding those magic engines he possessed, each one is worth more than a nation's treasure." Ariel was also concerned. "Yes, and there are 8 in total. There's no way Varian could have gathered that much firepower on his own. Where on earth did he get?" The principal replied, "They were stolen." He looked at them and said, "They were hijacked in transit. All 78 transport agents were wiped out." Hearing this, Bella and Gray were horrified. Ariel asked sharply, "All 78 Academy transport agents dead? Don't tell me. That was the case from 15 years ago." The principal confirmed, "Correct, the stolen goods from that year were these very engines." She then asked in a low voice, "If I recall correctly, the one responsible back then was..." The principal obviously knew very well, Blood Food. You've all likely heard that name before. Gray and Bella indeed knew them. The world's largest criminal organization, those parasites of humanity. No matter how many times they are destroyed, they crawl back out of the shadow. He glanced over at Bella. She was gnashing her teeth in hatred. "They are also the ones who killed my parents." Oradrom replied heavily, "Yes, even if destroyed 100 times they reappear. No one knows where they hide, nor who their leader is." It's said that over 70% of crime-related deaths are caused by them, and it wouldn't be surprising if their members have already infiltrated this academy. The worst part is there's no way to identify them, and even if we did, the academy wouldn't act. Gray was indignant at this. "What? Even if there are criminals inside the academy?" Ariel stopped him. "That is simply how the academy operates nowadays. Anyone with talent is given the chance to grow stronger, regardless of bloodline, race, or gender." The principal confirmed, "Exactly, and whether that person is a criminal or not doesn't matter." Bella found this rule absurd. If there are criminals here, they should be punished. In truth, the principal was also helpless. "I agree, but the higher-ups don't see it that way." Bella asked worriedly, "Aren't you the principal?" Oradrom could only reply, "I'm just a figurehead." He slammed the files down. "I might be the face of the academy in name, but my actual authority is negligible. You want to know who is really running this place?" Both Bella and Gray nodded with silent determination, yet Oradrom laughed, "Then become stronger. The more you prove your individual strength, the deeper you'll be allowed into the academy, and you'll gradually uncover the hidden secrets." He added, "I cannot give a name, but you have an upperclassman, someone influential enough to dictate the entire direction of the academy." Even that insane policy allowing criminals to join was his decision. Gray asked quietly, "So if we become stronger than him?" The principal confirmed, "Yes, perhaps then you could change the entire academy." He looked straight at them. In this place, strength is everything. Both Gray and Bella clenched their fists. Oradrom looked at them and thought to himself, "Still, this is quite interesting." Ariel had no chance of beating Varian, which means one of these two did it. Ariel's divine eyes are as sharp as ever. "I can't wait to see what kind of monster she's going to create." At this point, Gray had left the principal's office. He looked at the mark of the curse on his hand. He thought, so that's it. The power to run the academy. N letter 1 EBF UMIN MU letter 1 ED1 and H letter 1 E1 K letter 1 EBB Santir letter 1 EBNG H O letter 1 EB7 C Tim Ra K letter 1 EBBG I letter 1 EADT Day Fia. Then first I have to focus on getting stronger. Suddenly, someone walking past bumped into him. Gray was startled and said, "Sorry." But immediately after, a direct kick came flying at him. He was struck and sent flying back. Luckily, Gray managed to stay on his feet. But the damage from that kick was not insignificant. The aggressor remarked, "Tougher than I thought." Gray asked politely, "Is there a problem?" He gritted his teeth. "A problem." The lunatic began to curse, "Walking around like you own the place. An accidental failure, like you doesn't even deserve to step foot in this hallway." Gray understood somewhat. It was another one who hated the special admissions, but this is the first time someone dared to kick me right in the middle of a hallway. He gripped the sword at his hip and asked, "You want to fight?" The guy pondered for a moment and replied, "I'd be happy to, but it looks like the second failure has just arrived." Behind him was Professor Ariel walking toward them. He immediately started to leave. "I'm off." As he walked away, he muttered curses. "Sorry, but the surveillance here is too tight. I couldn't get any closer." He bit his finger until it bled, "But I'll send someone else there soon enough." Deep Bull confirmed, Varian. On this side, the professor came up and asked, "What happened?" Gray greeted her first, Professor Ariel. Then he said, "Some student just kicked me. He said a God-eye special admission like me shouldn't be showing my face in the academy hallway." She observed the situation and replied, "No weapons, no injuries, meaning I have no legitimate reason to intervene." Then Ariel looked at him and asked, "So why didn't you chase him down and punch some sense into him?" Gray was shocked. "Wait, I'm allowed to do that." She acted like she didn't care. "In my capacity as a professor, I can't permit it, but my eyesight has been poor lately. If something happened nearby, I probably wouldn't see it." Gray decided not to press it. "That's way too suspicious. Forget it, I don't want to cause any more trouble." Ariel didn't see it that way. "A pity, really." Suddenly she asked, "Let me ask you something. Are God-Eye students really hated that much?" Gray slightly covered his arm and replied, "People mock us often, but this is the first time someone actually laid a hand on me." Ariel asked again, "So they ridicule you?" She felt a sense of helplessness. "Sorry, if only I had a bit more authority." Seeing this, Gray comforted her. "Please don't worry about it. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have even set foot in this academy. Besides, Bella and the others will prove that the God-Eye program wasn't a mistake. After all, you have very sharp eyes, Professor." Ariel pondered these words for a brief moment. She felt her heart lighten. "Thank you." Then Ariel pointed straight at Gray and said, "But don't think this is just someone else's problem. Of all the Divine Eye students, I have the highest expectations for you." She listed a few names, Amy White, Leek Muller, and Jacob Bloomfield, as former special admission students who had become top-tier talents. But she added, "This is the first time I've believed someone could surpass human limits. It was when I met." Facing the professor's expectations, Gray thought to himself, compared to them, that won't be easy. Yet he had other worries. No, thinking like that is weak. The person behind Varian surely hasn't given up on the idea of summoning the Purger. Even they couldn't do anything against that guy. I return to this timeline to make sure I can defeat it. The fate of this world is in my hands. At the training grounds of the World Union Academy, the professor explained, "Today's swordsmanship lesson will be practical combat. Pair up according to the list on the board." Gray thought to himself, practical combat, huh? I need to stay completely focused. If I make a mistake, people will start badmouthing the Divine Eye students again. At the very least, I have to prove that I'm not inferior to the regular students. Suddenly he felt something was wrong. Oh boy. The pairing list read, Gray Lee, Leonhard Appius. Gray thought to himself, Leonhard Appius, huh? He's at the top of the swordsmanship course, which means he's the strongest first year. The professor looked at the students and said, "I have paired you up with students of similar skill levels, so feel free to fight. Consider this a real battle." Deep down, Gray strongly objected, "Similar skill levels, my foot. Why do I have to fight the top student when I'm just a special admission?" Gray recalled, and he hates Divine Eye students too. He's probably itching to beat me up after what happened last time. Suddenly, he noticed someone behind him. Before he knew it, the guy was already there. "Hey," Leon said cheerfully, "looks like we're a pair. I'm so happy about that." He thought secretly, getting to fight Gray, the top of the class, is truly an honor. I've trained harder than anyone else. Gray, take a look at my real swordsmanship. Gray became increasingly terrified, this guy. That bright smile of his, there was no doubt, he was thrilled to finally have a legal chance to beat him up. Leon added, "This is really something to look forward to." On the training ground, the instructor asked, "Is everyone ready?" The command rang out, "Begin." Immediately, the students started dueling. Leon gripped his sword and lunged forward. "Here I come." Luckily, Gray managed to block it. Leon swung his sword forcefully, sending Gray stumbling back. He immediately seized the opportunity to rush forward. Leon thrust his sword forward, but Gray luckily dodged in time. He didn't want to show weakness either, so he swung his sword up. Both their swords clashed powerfully. Leon spoke admiringly to Gray. "You're really strong. It's hard to believe you didn't get in through the regular route." Blade after blade, as sharp as knives, continued to be unleashed. Both were fighting neck and neck. Gray thought to himself, "I thought I would be defeated immediately. Who would have thought I could hold my own? But even if I put in all my strength, I still can't match his raw power." He carefully observed Leon. His swordsmanship is truly amazing. It's that textbook-perfect style, every standard technique perfected to a scary degree, even with my experience from my previous life and my master's training. Suddenly, he stopped to gather momentum. Leon put all his strength into this strike as he lunged, and to think he's already this much of a monster after only one lifetime. Before everyone's eyes, Leon and Gray fought, leaving only blurs of their swords. They were amazed. He's actually on par with Leonhardt. Leon was equally thrilled. "This is amazing. I could fight like this all day." Meanwhile, Gray was exhausted. "I have no energy left. If it weren't for Professor Heathcote's training, I would have collapsed already." He looked at Leon. Why isn't he panting at all? Filled with hesitation, "I'm about to collapse. I have to end this match now." The professor said to fight like it's real, right? Consider it a real battle. Instantly, Gray's gaze sharpened. In front of him, Leon was gathering momentum to swing his sword. He swung a powerful blow, but Gray ducked and dodged it. He put his strength into his hand on the ground. Leon was horrified. What? Gray had lunged low and kicked Leon's leg. Leon was still stunned when he was kicked in the leg. What the? Gray immediately seized the opportunity to thrust his sword upward. Now he was terrified, so he really considers this a life-or-death battle. However, Leon still swung his sword up. Both blades were held at each other's throats. Both Leon and Gray maintained their stance, intent on taking the other's life. He lowered his sword and offered his hand. "It's a draw, good fight." Leon replied, "No, not quite." He pondered at that moment. "All I could do was swing my sword. On the other hand, you could have pierced my heart completely if you wanted to." Leon looked sharply at Gray and asked, "That was a fake, so you tried to stab me in the neck. Am I wrong?" He had to confess, "You caught me, but even with all those protective charms, isn't putting a sword to someone's heart in a mock battle trouble." Leon didn't argue, "But it still means I lost." Saying that, he turned and left. "Thanks to you, I finally understand the difference between real combat and sparring, and that a fight isn't just about swordsmanship skill." Gray still tried to make excuses. That was partly a cheat move in a swordsmanship class anyway. But Leon cut him off. The teacher said to treat it like a real battle. In a real battle, there's no such thing as cheating. Suddenly, he twisted his shoe, so. Then he raised his sword and challenged him excitedly. "Let's go another round." Facing the blade, Gray was fed up. "Another round. I only won because I caught him off guard. If we fought head-on, I wouldn't stand a chance. This isn't even about technique anymore. His overall physical strength makes me feel like trash." Suddenly, someone stepped in to interrupt. "Stop right there." An arrogant student said, "Whether it's real combat training or not, this is a sword class. No one said you could use anything other than a sword." He mocked Gray. "And how does a special admit like you get paired with the top student? Don't get cocky just because you have a little magic." He thought to himself, "I didn't choose this match." Unexpectedly, Leon stepped up to stake his claim. "The professor decided I was the only one worthy of Gray. Please step aside." The professor also stepped up, saying, "As Leon said, I'm the one who paired you. I paired students of equivalent overall strength, right?" He affirmed Gray is the only one who can go head-to-head with Leon, and he nodded with great satisfaction. The professor looked at the troublemaker and said, "If you aren't satisfied, try fighting him. Beat Gray, and you can be Leon's opponent." Provoked, he angrily agreed. "Fine." He still tried to mock. "I defeated the examiner to get in here. Don't lump me in with those who barely made the cut, or those who didn't pass at all." But Leon looked down on him. He's judging Gray based on his admission type without knowing his real strength, which makes me feel like I'm looking at my old self. He trusted Gray unconditionally. This is a real opportunity. His strength deserves to be recognized. Then Leon shifted his focus. "But more importantly, you interrupted my time with Gray." Seeing his gaze, he hurriedly looked up. He only saw Leon's handsome face distorted with anger. "For that crime alone, you deserve to die." The troublemaker truly didn't understand. Why? Why is he so angry? The professor said to Gray, "If you don't like real combat rules, fine, you can only use your sword, okay?" Gray, behind him, Leon was still filled with murderous intent. He's secretly worried. "I really don't know how strong this guy is, but if he entered the academy through the regular exam, it won't be easy." Gray assessed his opponent. "He definitely has better stamina and physical strength than me. Even with my master's brutal training, I can't overcome years of nutrition and proper physical condition." Gray tried to leave himself an out. I'm not too confident in my skills, but losing doesn't mean expulsion, right? The professor also said, this is just class training. Regardless, don't go easy on each other. Gray raised his sword, all right, and the other guy was ready in position. Instantly, he seized the opportunity to rush forward. He thrust his sword forward, roaring, time for this special admit to learn his place, remember your role. Instantly, both swords clashed powerfully. Suddenly, Gray was surprised. He flicked his sword lightly. Then he knocked him back. The troublemaker was stunned, while Gray thought to himself, he hit too lightly. His strength, there's nothing special about it. The guy angrily gathered momentum to swing his sword. Gray thought to himself, is he pulling his punches? Yet, who would have thought he'd be defeated on the second strike? He fell backward, his head hitting the ground. The professor announced the result, match over. Gray approached, asking anxiously, sorry, are you okay? I only aimed for your sword, but I hit you instead. I thought you'd die. The guy wouldn't admit defeat and picked up his sword. It was just a coincidence. You only caught me when I was off guard. Despite being bruised and battered, his face a mess, he still said, one more round. Everyone was buzzing, geez, that looks really painful, and the professor helplessly replied, all right, enough, just fight until you're satisfied. And so he swung his sword to attack again. In the middle of the training ground, the sun was shining bright. Gray asked worriedly, are you okay? Someone with swollen eyes mumbled, I'm fine. It was the class troublemaker, who had been beaten until his face was distorted. The professor helplessly said, all right, that's enough. Someone take him to the infirmary. The professor helplessly said, all right, that's enough. Someone take him to the infirmary. He gathered the students and declared, and so the representatives this year will be Gray and Leon. Does anyone object? He curiously asked, representative. The professor replied, the two strongest first years will face the second-year champions in the intergrade match. He pointed at Gray and said, the first years have lost 35 times in a row. His eyes filled with hope, but perhaps this year will be different. Gray asked in surprise, 35 consecutive losses. He spoke up, is the strength gap between the first and second years really that large? The professor confirmed, indeed, at this academy, even 1 year's difference makes a huge gap. He resignedly added, losing is so common that people just assume we'll lose. Then he dangled the bait, just not fighting poorly is already good. But if you win, it will be recorded in the Academy's history as a miracle. Just being chosen to compete is an honor. With that, the professor gave Gray a confident pat on the shoulder. Then he took his leave, saying, don't be too tense, all right, class dismissed. Gray silently processed the information he had just received, realizing that the interclass competition wasn't as serious as he had originally thought. However, for a God-Eye special admission student like himself, this was the perfect opportunity to prove that he truly was capable of fighting. Gray told himself that he simply had to train as hard as possible. Inside the meeting room, the principal announced, next, the final item for today's faculty meeting is a proposal from Professor Bud. The old professor replied, yes, sir. He laid out his proposal. I move for the expulsion of the God-Eye special admission student, Amy White. Ariel was indignant, demanding to know why he would make such a suggestion when she was the one in charge of the God-Eye group. To which Budra immediately countered, and that is exactly the problem. He voiced his objection, noting that Amy White had failed her third-year advancement exam, yet she was allowed to remain solely because she was a special admission student. Every other student who fails their exams is expelled. How does that look in terms of fairness? Professor Ariel continued to defend her students' rights, stating that Amy was developing world-class combat potential, and that it was only due to a severe physical backlash that she couldn't demonstrate her full power. Otherwise, she would have passed the exam easily. The old professor mocked her again. Oh, please, that excuse again. Another professor joined in the indignation. Just label it physical backlash, and a useless student suddenly becomes a sealed genius. How long do you plan to use that mysterious power as a pretext? Ariel refused to back down, reaffirming that she was telling the truth and that the student could regain her full power at any moment, perhaps even tomorrow, warning that pushing her now could cost her that chance forever. The professor snapped back sharply. You've used that exact same reasoning before. He grew angry, asking if her goal was simply to keep a student who didn't meet the standards here indefinitely. Ariel didn't give an inch, arguing that the academy existed to nurture exceptional talent, and that there was no point if they expelled those with innate gifts just because they didn't fit the system. The fat professor chimed in again, innate gifts. He sneered contemptuously, remarking that while God-Eye students might have been impressive in the past, the current batch was nothing but a bunch of failures. He listed off several prominent names, Amy White, Bella Albright, Jacob Bloomfield, mockingly suggesting that the divine eye had lost its ability to judge people, while the professor next to him added that perhaps it was time to consider abolishing the God-Eye special admission category altogether. Ariel was stunned. Abolish it? What are you saying, Professor? Budra threatened her, reminding her that while the God-Eye category was established long ago by the Academy's founding council, it could be abolished the same way, needing only a majority vote from the faculty. Another professor agreed, stating frankly that the current God-Eye group had failed to make any impression whatsoever. Others voiced their complaints, noting that while they heard Bella Albright was making progress, it wasn't anything remarkable, and even her mana capacity was quite suspicious. These remarks left Ariel in a difficult position as she tried to respond. The professors began to gossip, saying the old God-Eye groups were strong, but this one lacked any of that former prestige. The entire group of professors began to gang up to exert pressure. Ariel felt stuck between a rock and a hard place, realizing more people opposed the God-Eye program than she had thought. At this rate, it really could be dismantled. Budra continued to mock, saying it had been obsolete for a long time and should be discarded. He even went as far as to ridicule Ariel personally, asking if she still intended to claim that her judgment of people was superior to all of theirs. Her hands clenched tightly. She wanted to tell them that yes, it was. But Ariel caught their prejudiced glares and realized that saying so would only make them angry. Surrounded by the group of men, she felt stifled, knowing they had never liked her to begin with. She tried to find allies, knowing that many professors still cared whether the God-Eye program benefited the Academy. To get them on her side, she couldn't say anything that would alienate. Her lips were pressed firmly together. Budra provoked her further, asking if she had run out of arguments and suggesting she should at least recognize she was past her prime. Another hounded her, saying that despite her past achievements, she should retire before she ruined her own reputation. The taunts came without end, with someone suggesting that if she wanted to teach her pet students her own way, she should start her own academy. The old men burst out laughing at the idea, mockingly wishing her luck in finding students willing to follow a washed-up God-Eye professor. Ariel felt helpless, knowing she could still spot genius. But the kids needed time, and if given that time, they would prove everything. She just had to stop them from being expelled. She decided firmly that she would do so by any means necessary. Suddenly, someone mentioned Ariel's favorite student, asking if there wasn't a boy named Gray in the God-Eye group. The professors shifted the topic toward him, mentioning he was quite promising among the first years in the swordsmanship department, and nodding he was also participating in this year's interclass competition. Budra saw a golden opportunity and admitted the boy seemed to have some potential. He proposed to Ariel that they let the boy prove himself in the match, and they would decide the future of the God-Eye category after seeing the results. She glanced toward the professor, who had just helped her out of the tight spot. He could only shake his head helplessly. Ariel decided she had to take the risk. She spoke up, explaining that his power wasn't suited for simulated matches, and that if it were a real life-and-death battle, things would be different. She was cut off immediately, another excuse. The professor vehemently disagreed, arguing that if a student couldn't perform in practice, they would be useless in real combat, a fact every professor there knew. Ariel flared up, telling them they didn't understand, and that his ability wasn't ordinary swordsmanship. The entire meeting room suddenly fell silent. The principal then dismissed the meeting, stating they had discussed enough and that the current debate was going nowhere. He suggested that seeing a God-Eye student perform in the match sounded reasonable, and that they would observe his performance and decide later. Ariel was shocked and wanted to object, but the principal had already declared the meeting adjourned. The old professors left the room full of sarcasm, saying they were now looking forward to the match and that it should be quite entertaining. Only one professor remained, looking back inside with concern. It was Ariel, sitting slumped and withdrawn in her chair. Her hands clenched tightly as she whispered an apology to her students, blaming her own weakness. She remembered Gray saying that it was better for one to die than all three, and telling her to leave it to him. Ariel felt deep regret, knowing his power wasn't meant for simulations. His dominant arm was in pain and growing numb, yet this was the situation they were in, and she knew he still needed more time. Her lips pressed together, knowing that what she was hoping for from him now was simply asking too much. But even so, she begged, her body trembling. "Please help them," she whispered, pulling herself into a tight ball. She pleaded for help for those children, raw gems that hadn't been polished but possessed world-class potential. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Please protect their future," she wept, her tears falling uncontrollably. On the day of the interclass exchange match, the Academy's arena was lit up brilliant. The professor announced, "All right, we will now begin the interclass exchange match. Introducing the competitors, first was the top first-year student, Leonhard Appias. Next was the top second-year student, Lionel Hartman. The challenger from the first-year class, Gray Lee. And the challenger from the second-year class, Diebel Radar. Gray looked at Diebel and thought worriedly, wait, isn't that the guy who attacked me in the hallway? Do I really have to fight him? Now we shall witness their capabilities. Every student and professor directed their full attention to the arena. Professor Budra still maintained his disdainful appearance. Leonhardt thought to himself, so many professors came to watch. Is it always like this for normal exchange matches? To which Hartman replied, no, this is a first. Last year only 3 swordsmanship professors bothered to show up. He was curious why it was so crowded today, which triggered a memory for Leonhardt. He introduced his friend proudly. The professors must be curious about Gray. It's a testament to their good eye for talent. Looking at Leonhardt's smug expression, Hartman wondered if he had always been like this. Professor Budra overheard the conversation and remarked, just as you guessed, we've come to watch the final match of the God Eye Special Admissions group. The students began to chatter excitedly upon hearing this. Gray immediately spoke up, asking what he meant by final. Budra directed his gaze toward Ariel and asked if nobody had told the boy. He answered dismissively, the God Eye class is being disbanded. Gray was stunned. Disbanded. Professor, is that true? Professor Ariel remained silent, thinking that if she told Gray the truth, he would push himself too hard. He might even use that power, which in his current state could kill him. She finally spoke. Ariel reassured Gray, telling him Budra was just trying to mess with his head and that he shouldn't let it affect him. He just needed to focus on the fight. A brief silence fell over the arena below. Gray noticed her arm was trembling. He knew what he had to do. He replied, if the professor says so, then fine. Budra saw this and said contemptuously, whatever, go ahead and make a fool of yourself. He aimed his words at her, saying that when the boy lost miserably, the other professors would understand that Ariel's eyes were no longer as sharp as they used to be. Unexpectedly, Gray countered immediately, I can't let that comment slide. The professor paused. What? I don't care if you insult me. Gray stated firmly, but don't you dare underestimate Professor Ariel's judgment. This statement made her freeze. Budra held his ground, asking what kind of power her eyes could have possibly seen in him, nodding that unlike his professor, everyone who wasn't senile was certain he would lose pathetic. Gray was angry, his voice dropping an octave. Fine, then let me prove you all wrong. The old man was incensed, demanding to know what was with the disrespectful attitude. The referee below commanded, competitors, please separate and join your teammates. Ariel still couldn't stop worrying, thankful for his trust, but wondering what Gray was planning to do. If he were fighting the top student, his practical swordsmanship skills might have given him a slim chance. But the opponent he was facing was a monster. Diebel Radartel, Bradley had surgically altered his brain, boosting his reflexes to superhuman levels. He was essentially a living weapon. He was the absolute worst opponent for Gray's ambush-style tactics. Don't tell me, is he planning to use that ability? At the thought, Ariel's lips instinctively pressed together. She stood in the stands and called out, Gray. Ariel pleaded, don't worry about me, please. Just don't overexert yourself. He was taken aback for a moment. Then Gray gave a small smile. He reassured her, I've got this. The referee, along with all the professors and students, was now looking toward the stand. The referee announced, the arena is protected by a magic barrier to prevent fatal injuries. Triggering your opponent's protective shield counts as a win. Fight as if this were a real battle. Leon muttered to himself, a real battle. The match between the top-ranked students began. Leon immediately seized the chance to lunge forward. Here I come. Hartman also excitedly took his stance. Very good, show me what you've got. The sharp clashing of their swords echoed as they struck each other. At this moment, Hartman had already gathered his momentum. He swung his sword forcefully. But fortunately, Leon ducked and dodged in time. He planted his hand on the ground to gather momentum. Then he kicked out powerfully, but Hartman dodged it. Leon sighed with regret. I guess I can't fight like a knight, Gray. But Hartman complimented him. You're actually pretty good. Honestly, you're stronger than I was as a first year. Then he radiated a wave of pressure and charged. Time to speed things up. This made Leon worried. Can I keep up? A flurry of sword strikes rained down like a storm. Hartman just kept chasing Leon down until he touched the barrier. Damn it. Hartman's blade reached him just in time. It was perfectly pressed against Leon's neck when the referee shouted, that's enough. The winner was decided. The winner of the top-ranked student match was Lionel. The two sheathed their swords and said politely, thanks for the match, great fight. Next, we will begin the challengers match. Two representatives stepped forward. Leon immediately said to him, "Good luck," and Gray replied, "Thanks." He thought to himself, "I've already talked a big game, now I have to pull it off." Before traveling back in time, I had fought countless monsters more desperate than this. Compared to those, this is still winnable. Deeble's sword tip dragged along the ground. He walked over, muttering, "Just a little bit more, Professor Bradley. I'll send him to the same place as you." "Down to hell," he added, accompanied by a savage smile. For the intergrade tournament qualifiers, the two took their fighting stances. The arena was dead silent, not a single sound. As soon as the referee shouted, "Begin," they immediately lunged at each other. Gray realized something was off. He was knocked back by Deeble. His sword hand trembled. Damn it, that was heavy. Gray observed the madman in front of him, even though Professor Ariel said his reflexes were enhanced. But could his arm strength be enhanced too? With this strength gap, all my tricks are useless. How am I supposed to fight him? He thought to himself, I still have that skill, but... Gray recalled Professor Ariel's warning. Listen to me, no matter what happens, do not use that power. At worst, it will kill you. At that time, he had confidently replied, yes. She warned him anxiously. The tournament is important, yes, but it's not worth risking your life. Moreover, the arena's defensive barrier won't be able to withstand it. If you use it, your opponent might lose their life. This really scared Gray. He had to risk it all and charge forward. Determined, he told himself that he could risk his life to protect his special divine eye admission, but killing someone right in the middle of a school tournament was out of the question. Deeble also gathered momentum. Two slashes collided powerfully. Deeble immediately swung a dangerous strike. Luckily, Gray blocked it just in time, thinking to himself, why are his movements so strangely simple? With his physique and reflexes, he could take me down in one hit. Gray assessed sharply. He's not lacking in technique. He's definitely holding back on purpose. What is he planning? Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of a savage smile. The smile terrified Gray. He was knocked back. After that, Deeble's sword tip lunged again, aiming straight for Gray's eyes. I can't dodge this. Yet he still managed to raise his sword to block it in time. Gray couldn't understand it. Why? I clearly couldn't have reacted in time. He gathered momentum and shoved Deeble back. He slid back as he, deliberately reducing his attack force. In the stands, Ariel was also surprised. She was startled when she looked through her divine eye. Inside Deeble was a heart covered in mana. What is this power? A dark purple-black mana source glowed, covering his entire heart. Suddenly, Ariel looked at Budra's group. The old man was still mocking them. The second years this year really have issues with their character. They clearly could have ended it at any time, yet they keep dragging it out. Seems so. That divine eye student is struggling to block every strike, yet still refuses to surrender. Doesn't that prove he's not strong enough? Maybe he knows the divine eye quota is about to be abolished, so he's signaling us. Because if we keep waiting like this, the divine eye spot will become a joke. That makes sense, truly an exemplary student, thinking for the academy. All the malicious comments were directed at Gray. Suddenly, Ariel shouted, "Stop the match now. Stop immediately. It's dangerous." That ugly old man Budra still had his nasty demeanor as he asked, "Dangerous where? Are you talking about this simulation match?" Another guy chimed in, "It seems you don't know, so let me tell you. The arena is covered by a powerful protective barrier. Any attack that could cause fatal injury will be automatically blocked. So the students can fight with all their might without fear, unless you have another reason for wanting to stop the match." Down below, Gray was still struggling to defend. Up in the stands, Ariel explained, "Of course I know about the protective barrier, but it won't be enough to protect Gray." Instantly, a mana explosion occurred on the arena floor. Ariel was terrified to the core. Deeble had activated his heretical power. He gathered momentum and raised his sword high, then swung it powerfully toward Gray. He was overwhelmed by the sight. The entire stands shook violently after that one sword stroke. Gray looked down in horror. Where the blade had just swept past, it left a deep gouge. It even cut through the academy's barrier. It sliced through Budra's false pride. Ariel worried, "The barrier. I told you so." She hurriedly cast magic. Damn Bradley. I didn't expect him to plant that in the academy. But the magic was blocked by the barrier. Ariel panicked. The barrier in the stands is too strong. I can't use the binding spell. She screamed, "It's an emergency. Disable the barrier immediately. Cancel the tournament. This isn't a fencing match anymore." But that bunch of useless blowhards had gone pale as sheets. Damn it. Ariel shouted toward the arena, "Run, Gray. It'll take too long to stop the match from the outside." He heard it faintly, "Run." But he barely had time before having to dodge a lethal blow from Deeble. If he turned his back for even a second, he'd be dead on the spot. The students were terrified and panicked by the sight. The professor standing in the stands looked down and muttered to himself, "The professor's magic will take at least 30 seconds to reach them. Too slow." It seems there's no other choice. He pinned his hopes on Gray. It's still a bit early, but full of trust and encouragement, he thought, you have to do it, Gray. The professor shouted an explanation. Gray, think of your body as the sword. Don't just swing the blade, move your body with that power. Struggling to dodge Deeble's attacks, Gray thought, think of my body as a sword. What on earth does he mean by that? But if the teacher said so, he would do it. Gray paused and told himself, no, I have to do this. He became still. I am a unique blade. Focus, put everything into it. That blade was already closing in to take his life. It kept getting closer. Then it struck the solid barrier hard. Behind Deeble, Gray was swinging his sword. He looked back in terror. Gray had grasped the lesson and thought to himself, has he been this slow the whole time? No, he gripped his sword tightly. He swung back powerfully, returning the misery Deeble had put him through. It was him who was getting faster.